Is it possible to go too far? Are there things you won't include in a film?
Yes, sure. The things that I feel that should not be used at all, because I personally feel that I cannot handle it. I would never tell a story about kids being in jeopardy.
Anything else?
Not much else.
So you'd make a film about almost anything?
And generally, yes, I would. I mean, in fact, I have.
I love Paul Verhoeven. I mean, go figure. If you know me and my taste, you would know that this dirty old man's resume is right up my alley. You get everything with this guy. Graphic violence, black comedy, sharp social satire, vulgar dialogue, crazy production design, copious nudity, and enough variety in the stories to make him one of my favorite filmmakers working today. Every film he's made is interesting. There are really only a few was-okay movies that he made, and with one exception, those are mostly localized into his early work. For better or for worse, Verhoeven has always been swinging for the fences, and as far as I can tell, as long as there are lungs in his body, he will keep doing it. And I wanted to do a little retrospective on each of his films and what they mean to me, because we don't talk about this enough, but we're so lucky to have a Paul Verhoeven today. In particular, I want to focus on the satirical undercurrents that are in almost all of his films. Okay, wait, it's gonna get really boring for the next 30 seconds, but stick with me, it's important. His features can be pretty easily divided into 3 distinct phases. For simplicity's sake, we are going to be referring to the 6 films he directed between 1971 and 1983 as Phase 1, or the Dutch era, because they're in Dutch. The 7 films he directed between 1985 and 2000 as Phase 2, or the American era, because they were made in America. And the 3 films he's directed from 2006 onward as Phase 3, or the post-American era. Wait, I don't like that. No, the modern era. Ooh, that's better, Jacob. You're working really hard. Also, this video is very long, and while it's intended to be watched from start to finish, I don't blame you if you want to skip around to certain movies, if you don't want spoilers or just aren't interested in one of them. I'll put time codes in the description, so feel free to use those. And, let's go. It's worth noting that about 56.25% of these films are not in English and have French, German, or Dutch actors. I'm gonna try my very best with their names, but remember, it's the thought that counts. With that out of the way, Paul Verhoeven's first feature was called that, and this is the one that I have the least to say about, and that's by a long shot. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it, and most of those thoughts can be conveyed pretty quickly, and this film doesn't really have much satire to dissect. Not that there isn't any, but it's just not very compelling or developed. Okay, real quick, so I don't get any comments about this. You can debate whether or not this was Paul Verhoeven's first movie. Like a lot of directors, he got started by making some amateur short films. I watched some of those to see if they're worth talking about, and they're really not. I'll give them credit for being better than Kubrick's student films, but unlike Kubrick, there isn't really a clear line between it and his features. And since Verhoeven's first movie wasn't like a knockout masterpiece like Kubrick, I think that we should just start here. Also, he directed every episode of a miniseries, which I've heard is very good, but like, you've seen the length of this video already. Okay, moving on. I wouldn't really recommend this to anyone that isn't a Verhoeven completionist, because I think that's the only way to get something out of it that you wouldn't also be getting from better films. It follows 2 prostitutes in the Amsterdam red light district. On the surface, it does tackle a lot of the themes he will explore later, mainly when it comes to sex, sexual fantasies, and sex work. But if he did this story later in his career, it's safe to say that it would be a lot lot different. This is definitely the sweetest out of all of his outings. The rest of his movies are a lot meaner, a lot weirder, and have a lot more to say. When this film is at its best, that works to its advantage. I like these characters, and most of the best scenes in the movie are the silly and simple ones. Like this guy who pays top dollar to live out his very specific fantasy of being a chicken, but he keeps scratching the table with his foot, so she does this.
Piep! Je moet tokken. Ik piep. Piep! Jullie moeten tokken. Piep, 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 piep. Tokken. Piep, piep, piep. Jullie zijn kippen, je moet tokken. Tok, 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 tok. Als ik wil piepen, dan piep ik. Ik ben een piepkuiken. Piepkuiken. Piep, 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 piep. Tokken. Piep, 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 piep.
Of course, I am very refined in my sense of humor and could not bring myself down to the level of finding such smut comedically rich. Instead, I laughed when, due to this movie being in Dutch, the credits listed Ina Berlet as ass, because I proudly have the comedic sensibilities of a second grader. This movie is very laid back, and he isn't trying to shock you like he will in the future. It's his only movie to feature basically no violence in it. It is a cute, silly, horny little slice of life flick that kind of wore out its welcome after the first half. Even though a lot of the comedy comes from the men having unusual fetishes and sexual fantasies, it is very non-judgmental and presents them as living it out in safe and controlled ways. Which I like, but I also like conflict. So while these scenes are funny and make up some of the most entertaining parts of the movie, they don't really add anything substantial to the film, and while you would definitely have a worse film if you cut them out, you would also probably have a more consistent one. Leave it to Paul Verhoeven to make a movie about hookers so sex positive that it actually becomes kind of boring. But I'm grateful for the fact that the silly scenes are in the movie, because when it is trying to be serious, it kind of falls apart. One of the prostitutes has an abusive boyfriend who is just so unlikable. Now, PV has a lot of characters that you wouldn't necessarily want to hang out with in real life, so when I say unlikable, I mean not fun to watch. The actor did a good job of making me hate him, but I think a character this despicable and fucking irritating really didn't need to be in this movie. It isn't even satisfying to watch him get his comeuppance in the end. In my eyes, the only way they could salvage this character is by giving him the Ed 209 special, if you know what I mean. The best thing about the movie is its main duo. The main lady has a strict, no-nonsense attitude and is socially awkward, but enjoys what she does, while the other is frumpy and emotionally driven and is clearly not cut out for the work. They're both funny and likable, although one of them was definitely given more to work with than the other, and they do hold the movie together for the most part. I don't mind that this movie has softer edges than the rest of Verhoeven's catalog, but I think he realized that he was just a lot better and more interested in doing this than this. But it's interesting to see him do a different tone with this one, even if the movie itself doesn't really work on its own. And it's fitting, but not exactly a compliment to this film, that the best scene here is the one that is the most similar to the style he would develop later. As one of the characters, Nell, walks down this alley, everyone knows her, and everyone has something nasty to say.
Hey! Nel is op het doolhofspad! Blijf je wel alleen op straat? Ben je gereed? Ga je nog steeds plat voor een tientje? Ze hebben naar je gevraagd, Nel. Ze hebben naar je gevraagd. Ja, een grijsaard van 80 jaar.
And then she dies. That's life, man. Now this is more like it. Paul Verhoeven's second feature, Turkish Delight, is a step up from his last film in every single way. It is better directed, written, acted, shot, composed, and structured. And it isn't just an improvement, it's actually a really noteworthy and great film on its own. But, this is going to be a difficult one to talk about. Turkish Delight is without question one of the most important movies we're going to talk about on this entire list, and I could see you making the case that it might actually be the single most important. This movie meant and still means a lot of things to a lot of people, so let me get that context out of the way right now. Turkish Delight was released in 1973 and was based on a 1969 book bearing the same name written by Jan Walker. Walkers. Now, this book is still to this day read in almost every school across the Netherlands, and if you haven't read it, it's hard to not have absorbed it. I mean, apparently, I've never been, but I've read articles and reviews from people who grew up there, and that's what they say. The novel was semi-autobiographical, telling a sexually charged romance story between an unnamed sculptor and a woman named Olga. Olga isn't based on any single woman in Walkers' life, but rather is an amalgamation of a bunch of different women, and in the process recounts a lot of true experiences that he had with them through this character. It's interesting, it's complicated, and I'm not the one to talk about it. This book was a hit chiefly because, intentionally or not, it struck a nerve with people at just the right time. We were about to enter the 70s, baby, and with the introduction of the pill making sex for pleasure way more common and viable, the horny escapades found within the pages of Turkish Delight was exactly what everyone was looking for. As puts it in her translated essay in 2019, quote, "Turkish Delight was the book, our book. This was the way a novel should be, the only way. Funny, raw, brazen, provocative, filthy, cruel, aggressive, sweet, and heartbreaking. With Turkish Delight, you learned something about sex before you even did it. For a moment, you were part of real life, where people loved and betrayed each other like crazy." And so when Verhoeven's film came in, it perfectly rode that wave and is still the single most successful film in the history of Dutch cinema. It even managed to score what is still to this day Verhoeven's only non-technical, non-acting Oscar nomination when it was nominated for Best Foreign Feature. He knew what he was given here, and he put everything into it. I don't know anything about the book that Elle was based on, but other than that, I can confidently say that this is without a doubt the most faithful Verhoeven book-to-screen adaptation. Maybe it's because he didn't have the balls yet to change anything significant about the book like he did in later years, but I think it's because he knew how well this story was going to work on the big screen, because Turkish Delight is really, really, really good. This movie is like watching a filmmaker do his 2-hour kamikaze attack, doubling down on everything that worked in the first movie and doing it even better. It's darker, funnier, more explicit, more ambitious. I don't love everything about it, but it's fucking monumental in so many ways. The craziest thing about this film is how much it manages to do at one time. It is an authentically erotic and romantic love story mixed with nasty, disgusting elements, and manages to be an effective and morbid satire on cultural boundaries. Much like his previous film, Turkish Delight follows two inseparable yet ultimately incompatible people. In this case, it is the self-absorbed bohemian Eric and the naive and spirited Olga. The key difference being that their highs are much higher and their lows are much lower. Their meet cute feels like straight out of a Maverick's wet dream. Eric gets kicked out of a fancy, pseudo-classy restaurant for starting an uproar, and then he hitchhikes across the side of the road where he gets picked up by Olga, and then they have this interaction.
Neem je altijd liefdes mee?
Nooit.
Nooit.
Nee.
After talking for a little bit, they pull the car over and bone. And then this guy accidentally gets his dick stuck in his zipper, and it's embarrassing. And they have to drive over to this old couple's house and awkwardly ask for pliers, and then they drive away. And then after a beat, they have a laugh about it. Oh my gosh, we faced some adversity back there, but you know, it wasn't that bad because I was with you. Verhoeven directs sex much better in this one, and for how explicit the film is, I didn't find it particularly gratuitous. Sort of. I mean, it's not like he didn't know what he was doing casting these two. These are like ridiculously attractive leads. However, the focus is less on throwing some boobs and dicks on the screen as it is eliciting emotions through the frame. The last movie was kind of, this is a sad scene because the characters feel sad. This is a happy scene because the characters are happy. Instead, he earns these beats by aligning us with the characters, and nowhere does he do this more effectively than in the sex scenes. The fast sex is quickly edited, the slow sex is prolonged, the pleasurable ones are tender, and the rough ones are blunt. The opening is constant fucking to the point that it becomes exhausting because we don't understand who any of these women are, and that is exactly the arc that the main character is going through through at this particular moment. It's very smart. If anything, my biggest gripe with the film is that sometimes they didn't really do the best job of actually simulating the sex scenes. Like, they do this really weird thing where when they pretend to eat each other out, they like shove their heads into the other's pubic bone. What the fuck is up with that? Anyway, the framing of the sex isn't the only way the direction is great. In general, it feels a lot more purposeful. And I really do get why this film was as important as it was, because it really is that subversive and daring with its story and style. I can imagine watching this in theaters when it came out and being like, oh my god, this is the best movie ever made. You know, now they have this guy in all of his movies, and The Assault, and Character, but at the time, the Netherlands had such an atrocious track record for filmmaking that they only submitted 3 films to the Oscars foreign language category in the entire decade of the 60s, and while it wasn't even their first film nominated, very tellingly, after Turkish Delight, they've submitted one every year. I was curious about what films they didn't submit the year previously, in part because I wanted to get context for the landscape of filmmaking over there at the time, but also because I saw Ape and Super Ape, which super deservedly got a nomination for Best Documentary that year. I went to IMDb and they listed 10 Dutch movies that year that weren't documentaries, and one of them is this. And the other one is, the other one's this.
Hebben ze ondertussen de motor gegapt? Hoe is dat nou mogelijk in zo'n korte tijd? Je kunt ook niemand meer vertrouwen tegenwoordig.
So yeah, I could see why Turkish Delight did a lot better. If you compare this movie to films that were being produced 5, 3, 1 years before, it has not only aged better, but is more vulgar, more explicit, more thoughtfully constructed, and it also cuts so much deeper than most films can even think of. This movie does not hold back. Verhoeven and Soteman really take no prisoners in their satire of young people pushing back on the conservative bounds of society, pointing a finger both at the people who stubbornly maintain the system and the ones who go too far in rebelling against it. Does it all work? Not exactly. This is Verhoeven's first explicitly satirical film, with the focus being on class, sex, boundaries, and art. A fascinating combination of themes to go with the overall presentation of the film, a messy, highly choreographed, suffocating display of yellows, oranges, and reds. But it does feel like the work of a younger filmmaker, one who is smart and passionate, but not exactly polished enough to structure those ideas into something you can look back on after the fact and say, yeah, I think that movie knew what it was doing the whole time. RoboCop, Starship Troopers, Showgirls, Basic Instinct, Elle, even Spetters are all much more pointed satires, even if some of them are overall weaker than this film. There is a desire to do something similar, but to me, it doesn't really live up to its own ambitions. Our setup is pretty simple. Eric is our lead character, and he represents the free-thinking, artistic, nonconformist crowd. He sleeps around, steals from the rich, and loves making a scene. Olga's parents are rich, stubborn, and conservative. They are the exact type of people that Eric is rebelling against. Olga herself is obviously torn between these two worlds and often conflicts with Eric's attitude. She spends her life going back and forth between these two ideologies until she develops a tumor like her mother, which eventually takes her life. She is a woman with a free spirit, a restricted body, and ultimately a tragically split mind. She even describes this as a door in her head. So that's the concept, and it's a fine concept. Sometimes it's executed very well. There is an early scene that I really like when he gets fired for sculpting maggots into Lazarus's legs when depicting his reemergence from the dead. It shows the hypocrisy of hiring artists to essentially be the messenger for your vision, a position which, ironically, Verhoeven will find himself in towards the end of the 90s. The motif of maggots appears a couple more times throughout the film, a reminder of the ever-present threat of death and foreshadows the movie's ending. I like that. It works. A more obvious example of this happening is the comedic set piece towards the middle of the film after Eric makes a sculpture that Olga models for. His art is put on exhibition for the Queen, and because it's a hot day, Olga casually turns to another kind of exhibitionism, if you know what I mean. And then there's this silly scene where this guy tries to hide this horrid sight from her with this marching band because the Queen is really posh and stuff. The irony being that the Queen is admiring a nude sculpture modeled after Olga's naked body, while the real thing would be deemed unacceptable. Most sequences in the film are like this, being funny, dramatic, and meaningful. The problem is that they don't always work together and are often made weaker when looked at within the context of the larger package. Like, while I definitely didn't think this at first, as time has passed, I've realized that I don't actually have a problem with the way the rape scene is handled. It's disturbing as hell, but it does effectively do what it sets out to do, and it does have a purpose in the narrative. You know, if you close a window, nothing can come in, but if you keep it open, everything does. It goes as far as it does because if the audience doesn't understand why they would kick him out, they might think like Eric, being like, oh, they're so uptight, which this movie really can't have you thinking if its satire is going to have any punch. In this moment, Eric's deep love for Olga intellectually comes crashing in with his disrespect for her physically. So it's well done, but when it's placed next to another well done scene shortly after where Eric saves a wounded bird on the beach and then nurses it back to health only to accept that now he must let it go, it's like, wait. Like, the scene is obviously supposed to be a metaphor for their relationship, but he didn't let her go, he got fucking kicked out and then she dies. If you want to parallel his relationship with Olga with a wounded bird, have him find it, nurse it back to health, and then beat it up, and then it flies away and shits on his eye, and then maybe he deludes himself into thinking that he's the bigger person because he's too lazy to chase after it. So again, that's kind of the thing with this movie, a bunch of great scenes that don't always work together. And that's part of why I don't enjoy it as much as some of his other films, despite how strong so much of it is. In '99, it was rated the greatest Dutch film of the century, which I'm on board with. I'm not gonna say it doesn't deserve this recognition, but I do think Verhoeven has topped this film, and with ones that he made in the Netherlands. I think it bears the same problem that any version of Turkish Delight will have, that it is the work of a man who constructs a single woman out of a bunch of different parts. But maybe that's why I like this version of the story so much, because there is that separation from character that is inherent to the medium of cinema, that it reflects the process of its own creation and highlights what makes Verhoeven's version of the story stand out. It's about the destructive nature of the artist and the muse. She may be a real woman, but Eric doesn't love her like one, obviously. And this is what the closing moments of the film are showing. After Olga, the woman, has died, he is given the wig that she wore during her cancer treatment. We hear that amazing theme by Rogier van Otterloo, and Eric glances over to the statue that Olga modeled for in the park. This Olga is the one Eric has always loved, and this is the one that will live in his memory, and he tosses the wig into the garbage truck. In the final moments of the film, he once again denies the reality of Olga, the wig, and admires the idea of her, the statue. He loves her for the version of her that he created, and throws the last memory of the real woman into the garbage. Going into this project, Katie Tippel was the film that I knew the least about. And I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't particularly excited for this one. Every still of this movie looks like this, or this, or this, or this. It seemed like it was gonna be boring, but I wasn't really being fair, and I gave the film a fair shot, and in some ways it did surprise me, but a lot of this movie is kind of what I was worried it was gonna be. But first, some context. Now, this is only my second video breaking down a director or writer's entire filmography, and with almost every entry in the series, there is going to be a point where I have to bring up the dark looming cloud that is studio interference. There are really only a few directors who have only made the films they want to make in the ways they want to make them. I talked about it last time with Rob Zombie's Halloween movies twice, but the interesting thing about Verhoeven is that he had two periods where his films were more so in the hands of the studio system, and they were both caused by completely opposite reasons. The astronomical success of Turkish Delight led to Paul Verhoeven's highly anticipated follow-up being given the highest budget for any Dutch movie up to that point. And while the film was generally well received and also did very well, it is without a doubt the most compromised out of all of the films he made in his home country. Jump to the 90s, Verhoeven is hot off the success of 3 consecutive box office smashes, then he releases Showgirls, flop. He returned to his sci-fi roots and made Starship Troopers, flop. And while these movies have since developed cult followings, people really did not like them when they came out. And so he made Hollow Man, a more commercial and stylistically muted film, a movie he has since spoken out against. Notice how the first time he made something intentionally compromising because of success, while the second was because of failure. And in both of these cases, he followed the films up with what are arguably two of his greatest works in their respective eras. Before producer mandates, Katie Tippel was supposed to be yet another step forward in his career, keeping the confrontational social satire of Turkish Delight, but on a story with a much bigger scale. Based on the writings of Neil Doff, the film was supposed to be an adaptation of her life, along with telling a larger narrative about the growing political and social unrest in late 19th century Netherlands. But the producers of the film essentially cut that second plot line, instead requiring Verhoeven to focus the story on Katie, with only tiny remnants of a searing social epic scattered throughout the uneven final product. This was reportedly due to budgetary restrictions, which I guess I understand. From the first scene of the film where Katie's family is waiting to board their ship to Amsterdam, you can tell the production value is much higher than everything he had done before. This was clearly a very expensive film, and the attention to detail in the production design, costuming, props, and makeup is top-notch. I think it narrowly edges out the next movie as the best looking in Phase 1. However, a lot of it feels like it really could have been spared in order to shoot more of the elaborate riot scenes, like what he did with Soldier of Orange. I guess I can respect the commitment, but if the producers were really committed to seeing Verhoeven's vision through and were only stopped due to financial limitations, it seems a little absurd that they didn't suggest cutting some of these corners. Like, did Katie really need to be a part of a family of, hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people? Yes, I know the historical figure Katie is very loosely based on did have a family of this size, but if you're fine changing stuff like the locations or even her name, why was the family of 9 essential? My guess is that there was probably some politics behind the choice to remove what would have been the most overtly socialist content in the film, but what do I know? As is, the film is pretty frustrating because the work was clearly not done to beef up Katie's plotline to make it work in isolation, wedging the movie in a disappointing middle ground between two better versions of itself. As far as positives go, I think that this first act is pretty solid, all things considered. Unconventionally for Verhoeven, who even at his most action-packed creates very talky films. The dialogue in the opening 10 to 15 minutes is actually allowed to take a back seat to the environment and the ambiance. Huddling underneath a rickety, crowded overhang during heavy downpour, a single lamp lighting a damp, cold cabin swaying with the ocean and the quiet moans of the wooden ship, a thick fire distracting the family from the bitter weather conditions in their new house. It is in these moments where Katie Tippel really shines. These moments work especially well because of the sound design, which is incredible throughout the entire thing. Even after letting this movie sit with me for all this time and rewatching it and thinking about it and writing the script and rewriting it and rewatching it, I am still not fully sure how I feel about the casting in this one. Now, as you may have noticed, this is the exact same couple that was in the last movie. I'm not going to assume that they were only cast because Turkish Delight made a fuck ton of money and that was the only way they were going to get people to see a period drama that they probably wouldn't care about otherwise. But let's be real, it probably was. And I'm kind of torn on it, because while I do think that Monique van de Ven does absolutely sell this character, adding an infectious playfulness to a role that could have been a bit hollow, man, Rutger Hauer, as much as I love him, I think was severely miscast in this role. I mean, the man's sexy, but I cannot buy him as this uptight, romantic, formal banker. He's a freak, and he will always be a freak, and I will always think of him as such, and it doesn't help that all of the scenes with him are kind of boring. This film has a large thematic connection with Showgirls. Misogyny, classism, sex work, capitalism, injustices, patriarchy, it's all here. The most powerful encapsulation of these themes for me is the first scene where Katie openly acts as a prostitute encouraged by her mother. She's like, go ask that guy for money, but instead of hearing that interaction, we hold on the perspective of Katie's mom. She looks at her daughter selling her body through the window and then glances behind herself at a butcher slicing a slab of meat. This is essentially what's being done to her daughter. Her only option to support her family is to completely divorce her body from her emotions and brain. The imagery is a little crass and obvious, but I think the fact that we see it from the perspective of her mother makes it way more interesting. This film is not so much anti-sex work as it is against the systemic injustices that force women into positions where it is their only option. While the economic pressure is the most explicit one, the parts of the movie that stick in my head are actually the social pressures. Like this scene with a very unprofessional encounter with the doctor.
Infectio dormitans. Illi loci. Zo. En nou, de voorkant. Hé, je bent een lekker diertje. Zucht eens.
I think this is a really interesting perspective for the subject matter, and in theory, Paul Verhoeven is like the absolute most perfect choice for a story like this. I do also think that when viewed from a modern perspective, the use of sexual violence in Katie Tippel does work better than it does in Turkish Delight. It's swift, not overly drawn out, and handled with a bit more delicacy from a formal perspective, and it also earns points for its authenticity, given that it's based on a real thing that happened to a real person. But I think the film really softens up in its back half, which is fine, but it kind of makes me question the message of the movie as it stands. As the movie's themes get progressively more and more inconsistent over the runtime, it kind of does something that I thought I would never say about a Paul Verhoeven movie, but it kind of teeters on the line of romanticizing traditional ideas. Not just that there is romance in the film, but that this struggle of adversity feels almost fetishized, which clearly isn't supposed to be the case because of how much time it focuses on the effects of poverty and the intensity of the rape scene. At one point, after Rutger Hauer reveals himself to be a dickhead and she goes to a riot, she says that money makes people into assholes, but by the time that happens, the movie's basically over already. And it's not like there were any signs of light when she was surrounded by people without money, they were all shitbags too. It's like the movie ends right before it's willing to make a definitive statement about its subjects, and it feels very limp. However you feel about Showgirls, one thing it is not is overly polite. Let me put it this way, because I don't have that much more to say about this film. Paul Verhoeven shows us a lot of really harsh and difficult things in his movies, but it's usually matched with a harsh and difficult point. Elle, his most critically acclaimed film ever, one of the best movies of the 2010s, is about how dealing with extreme trauma like sexual assault and child abuse can be an exhausting and messy and fucked up and never-ending process. Starship Troopers makes us question how far we really are from being a fascistic society, and makes us reflect on our own susceptibility to propaganda and phony patriotism. Even Turkish Delight says, "Listen up, fuckers." In the midst of this amazing sexual revolution that is happening right now, there will be a lot of stupid old people complaining about dumb shit, but there will also be stupid young people who will use the veil of anti-authoritarianism, the veil of freedom, to act upon their most heinous desires. These are not easy messages to swallow, so it makes sense that the films themselves wouldn't be. I actually don't think that Katie Tippel is even the cruelest movie we're going to talk about, but it's really the only one that doesn't match its cruelty with any biting message. I might be a bit more generous if he didn't go fucking crazy for the next 3 movies, but fortunately for us, he did. As far as Katie Tippel stands, I don't think it's a bad movie, but it is a very compromised one. Soldier of Orange is Paul Verhoeven's most unassuming work and is, in my opinion, one of his most underrated. It starts off and it looks like it's gonna be an above average but pretty standard period drama with some hints of Verhoeven's style. And in the beginning, I was like, oh no, please don't let this be another Katie Tippel. But yeah, no. This movie's pretty fucking good. So easily the best thing about this film is its story. IMDb's synopsis reads, during World War II, Dutch students joined the resistance movement against the German occupation of the Netherlands. But I'll be absolutely darned if there isn't more to it than just that. This isn't just Verhoeven's longest movie. To this day, it's his only feature beyond 2.5 hours. It is also his densest. The plot has tons of intricacies and callbacks and time skips and reveals and double crosses, but the dialogue is also super rich, and not in like a film bro Christopher Nolan, oh it's so deep way, favoring layered and memorable concision over wordy pseudo-intellectualizing. This is one of my favorite things about Verhoeven. He has such a knack for distilling incredibly complex ideas into the most simple and entertaining actions. Take this moment.
Haben Sie das geschrieben?
Jawohl, Herr Direktor.
Womit haben Sie das geschrieben?
Mit Scheiße, Herr Direktor.
Sind Sie wahnsinnig geworden? So reichen Sie ein Freilassungsgesuch ein?
Ich hatte vielleicht keinen Bleistift.
This one action presents a unique internal conflict, a moral dilemma with a clever solution, multiple jokes, a great representation of our character's no-nonsense attitude in the face of injustice, a very memorable scene, and is an integral part of the film's overarching narrative. But above all else, the movie absolutely succeeds in its emotional beats, more so than I thought was even possible with a protagonist as upright, stoic, and strong as Rutger Hauer is. Despite being the main character, he is not the heart of Soldier of Orange, at least not by himself. The heart is found here in the first 15 minutes of the film. In the beginning, these 6 men all meet up as students in a college. Because the film opens with newsreel footage from after the war, you already get the sense that the fraternity hijinks and initiation rites, which to the newcomers seem grueling, will eventually become innocent playground material in the face of Nazi Germany. And one of my favorite moments in the film is when the chair of the fraternity is picking on Eric. Oh yeah, Rutger Hauer's character is named Eric in this movie, like he was in Turkish Delight, and he's pouring soup on his head, and it's all embarrassing, and then he slams the bowl onto him, and then later the chair comes back and apologizes, and he feels really bad for it, and they become friends. That's nice, I like that. But yeah, around 15 minutes into the film, these 6 dudes all share a toast and take a photograph, and the film does a freeze frame on the still, and then it fades into sepia. This moment of pure joy is where everything falls from. The scene that directly follows this moment is, of course, the first announcement of war breaking out over the radio. They initially brush it off, assuming their country will be neutral like it was in World War I, but of course, history has its own plans. Their friendship is ripped apart and everyone is forced into adopting new identities and lives, and eventually, over the course of the war, they end up meeting each other again, and not always to fanfare. The story isn't just incredibly compelling, which it is, but it's also told in such a unique way. The film eschews many of the common problems found in similar action war epics. It's long, but it's snappy. It respects your time. In fact, it's so respectful of your time that it creates the only unintentionally funny part of the movie when a scene just starts with a character being shot at. It's soapy, but not melodramatic. It never lingers on the extreme emotions, it acknowledges them and lets them pass. It's patriotic, but not jingoistic. In fact, one of the biggest themes of the film is heroism found outside of a battlefield. This film isn't bogged down in any Mel Gibson bullshit. One of my favorite elements of the film is how it divorces effective spectacle from pure action. The thing about the subject matter, and if you don't know, it took the Netherlands well under a week of fighting to surrender to Nazi Germany. And while most filmmakers would probably try to squeeze every possible bit of action out of those 1 to 5 days, Paul Verhoeven is obviously a lot smarter than that. Some of the most exciting scenes are the parts of them misleading officers, decrypting messages, and doing covert photography. And when the action does hit, holy shit. This is our first taste of what Paul Verhoeven can do with a big blockbuster budget. And while it isn't as gory, inventive, or elaborate as his films in Phase 2 and 3, it's really fucking impressive. The approach to shooting the actual invasion really surprised me, but in a good way. Instead of twisting the story to put them on the front lines, the focus is on Eric and Hoos riding to a place where they can try to enlist. While doing this, they are forced to see all of the disturbing carnage that the skirmish left behind. The part where they're on the beach and they realize they got tricked and then they start getting fired at is probably the strongest visually. The colors and the lighting of this entire sequence is so dynamic. And even the parts that wouldn't be classified as traditionally action scenes are milked for all of their possible spectacle. Everything is a set piece, and something like command over language or knowledge can be just as powerful as the bombs. And that quality mirrors one of the overarching themes of the film, again, heroism outside of battle. This is one of my favorite things about Verhoeven, and is a trait that will define his best work in Phase 2. He adapts the formal elements of his filmmaking to match the content of each story. Also, this is the second film where Verhoeven has had Rutger Hauer stick his hand in a toilet and fish through actual human shit. The most impressively directed scene in the film for me is probably the part where these two guys get surrounded by troops. The way it creates a sense of urgency and chaos through the editing is really effective, even if all you're watching is a bunch of people being led into a car. What I really like about this next clip is the disorienting and anxiety-inducing jump between handheld footage and locked down shots. This is why I think that people who talk about Paul Verhoeven as provocateur first, artist second, really miss the mark. You don't have to love or even like his movies, but he's a very, very, very talented filmmaker. He also gets some pretty great performances in this one. Everyone is solid, and some people stand out as being exceptional, as is the case with Rutger Hauer as Eric. This is easily my favorite performance of his in a Verhoeven film, because even if these guys are more unique, I just can't wrap my head around the amount of weight that this performance has to carry. He holds the whole movie together. To bring it back to Mel Gibson and bad war movies, my problem with Hacksaw Ridge, among a lot of other things, is that the movie is trying to tell the story of this super principled and thoughtful soldier who never embraced violence, and it spends so long pontificating on his honor and peace. But formally, it's just a fucking grindhouse movie where the entire second half is just mindless, structureless gore played in rapid succession. If Desmond Doss saw Hacksaw Ridge, he would fucking hate it. And this is why Soldier of Orange does right by its main character. He is much like the film, stoic, aged beyond its years, sometimes funny, often joyous, but with an underlying sadness. One of the most powerful scenes for me is the one that occurs right before the intermission, where Eric and Hoos finally meet back up on the ship, and they're so happy and gay to finally find each other, before the camera does this long zoom out and reveals a soldier looking at the boat from across the sea. You can't escape the war, and as is the case for most of the people in this photograph, that is a fatal truth. In the most disturbing sequences of the film, two of them are tortured and executed in concentration camps. One of them because he's Jewish and fought against the Germans, while the other one was because he was captured for killing another one of the guys in this picture, who turned out to be betraying them the whole time. There are some lighter moments, but this is a very unforgiving, brutal film. For the first half of the film, on my first watch, I was a little bit mixed on the grosser elements of the film, which felt kind of out of place. You know, now that I say it out loud, I feel like this may have been a better place for that whole tangent about Rutger Hauer shoving his hand in shit. But live and learn, I guess. I think it's funny. But about halfway through the film, we get this very, very, very important line that made me rethink everything and helped me appreciate this movie's approach way more.
Deftigheid heeft afgedaan. Want na de oorlog wordt alles anders.
If you haven't caught on by now, this isn't a satirical film per se, but it is a very thematically rich one. And it all culminates in the most beautiful sequence in the film, and if you've already seen the movie, you probably know which one I'm referring to. About an hour into the film, Eric has a run-in with Alex, who is one of the people in the photo who did the toast, and he's part of a Nazi rally. And that moment serves its purpose in the film very well, and then you kind of forget about it. Another hour passes, and Eric is trying to get to this beach to warn his friends that another person is trying to betray them. And so, in order to get towards the beach, he has to go in this car with a bunch of drunken ladies. Okay, and now they're at the party. Don't want to look suspicious. Okay, now they're looking away, and just as he's about to sneak out, we get this fucking genius reveal. Already, this scene is blocked fantastically, where they both lock eyes at the exact same moment, and they keep staring as he is led back as part of the dance. And then Alex pulls him into the dance, and they have this short interaction that is so tense for both of them, because they both know that the other person could currently be in the process of fucking the other one over, when really it's a coincidence that all they can do is have this hilariously casual conversation while still doing the tango to not arise suspicion.
Het valt me van je tegen dat ik je hier zie, tussen al die NSB'ers, die bunkerbouwers.
Ach, het is oorlog. Is toch een leuk feest?
It is such a simple idea, but it's executed so well. The literal dance represents the symbolic dance that every character has had to do with each other because of the war. The movie up to that point is very, very good, but in this short scene, the stars align. I mean no hyperbole when I say that it is one of the most perfect scenes I've seen in any movie, period. Not because it's anywhere near being one of my favorites, but there is not a single thing I would change about it, and it honestly only gets better the more I watch it. And then the movie keeps going for about 30 minutes. Yeah, the only problem I have here is kind of one that I think the filmmakers were probably aware of, and I don't envy their position. Okay, I'm gonna read the first sentence of the Wikipedia article of the person Eric is based on. Eric was a Dutch writer who became a resistance fighter and RAF pilot during the Second World War. So, yeah, as you may have noticed, this movie has been going on for about 2 hours already, and we haven't even brought up the second half of his involvement with the war. You have two not great options here. You can either massively overhaul the true story that you're telling by either omitting or reordering essential elements of his life for the sake of balance, or you keep the movie going for another hour, which I don't think would have been possible even if Verhoeven wanted to, which I strongly doubt he did. So you kind of get the sense that they just had to bite the bullet and do this sort of compromised half ending between the two. And while, I mean, I guess I respect that they tried to address this part, it really just kills any consistency that the film had earned up to that point. It's not bad or anything, but it lacks structure, and it feels a bit like a list of interesting bullet points rather than a satisfying lead-up to the film's conclusion. I think what makes it a bigger problem than it would be otherwise is just the fact that Verhoeven got better. For almost any other filmmaker, this would be like the movie of their entire career. As is, it's kind of a serviceable epilogue to an overall still great movie, but one with a short but noticeable dip in quality. However, credit where it's due, the ending, like the actual final scene, is pretty strong. I mean, I think most people could telegraph it from a mile away. I mean, even the tagline spoils it, but it's still a very powerful encapsulation of the film's themes. Spoilers: Germany loses, and there's this huge celebration, and the film works its way back up to the newsreel footage it opened with, and Eric sees the building that his friends toasted in all those years ago. Their first few lines of dialogue show that while Eric got some medals and girls from his time as an RAF fighter, it didn't really mean anything to him.
Je ziet er fantastisch uit. Lintjes, waar heb je die verdiend? Beetje gevlogen. Pommen gegooid. We zijn al doorgerold. Vraag niet hoe.
We get the single best shot in the entire film, this wide angle of Eric standing in the room he did years before, and while the world outside is celebrating and he is still literally showered with praise as the confetti from outside that still rests on his head represents, all he can focus on is the room and the fact that it looks almost the exact same as it did when he took the picture. In spite of everything he and the rest of the world went through, it's the same room, just without his friends. We can spend our days pondering what-ifs and studying why it happened and wishing it didn't, and not that there isn't any value to those practices, but ultimately, it did happen, and they're dead, and we're not. What then can we do? Jack suggests picking up where they left off. Eric opens the door and takes in the celebration of a new world, and they do the exact same toast that they did 5 years ago in this exact spot. I think it's very telling that in the final moments of the film, it freezes on this image of the two men toasting in the door frame, and then it zooms in on Eric until the building, the last reminder of his life before the war, is fully out of view, and the credits roll over an image of him entirely standing in this new world. He survived, and isn't that the goal? Oh look, a transition. Hi, it's me. I'm recording this on my iPhone. It is currently Wednesday, December 25th. Despite Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976 stating that what I'm doing is perfectly legal, some copyright holders aren't accepting that. So, I have to slap this bullshit filter for Spetters, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, and Elle. Sorry, I know it sucks, but otherwise just this video wouldn't be able to be up at all. So, that's the alternative. Spetters is fucking genius. It is a twisted, satirical fable about the collision of glory and fate, told with a sly, almost Machiavellian wit and angst. And that is a little strange to say. I feel like me admitting that I think this is a great movie is gonna come back to haunt me in some way. Like I won't be able to get a job, or this will be played against me in court when I'm like 50. I'm sure you'll realize why I'm saying that soon, but first, what the fuck is a Spetter? Spetters. The movie wasn't given an English language title because it's a pun that doesn't really work in another language. Spetters does directly translate to splatters or splashes, like dirt, oil, or blood, all of which are in the movie and do literally splatter, but it also colloquially referred to someone who's good looking, like the English word hunk. Now, it's worth noting that up until this point, all of Verhoeven's features had been successes. Outside of Turkish Delight, critics had always been pretty polarized on his films, but the general public ate that shit up, attracting record-breaking attendance and almost universal praise among average filmgoers. Spetters was a different story. It was successful at the box office, but reception was mixed at best. Even before it came out, people were already shifting uncomfortably in their seats at the concept. Allegedly, when the producers got the film's screenplay, they were immediately like, oh yeah, hell no, you're not doing any of that shit. And to secure funding, Verhoeven promised to revise the script and tone it down a little bit, and then he proceeded to not change a single word of it and film it anyway. This movie was super controversial, and that is by design. No matter what you believe politically, there's probably going to be at least one thing in the film that you find offensive. From what I can gather, the more right-leaning crowd got mad at all the sex, the way the police are shown, the anti-Christianity, and the harsh criticism of the Dutch government, while the left-leaners were upset about the homophobia, the portrayal of women, a disabled character being treated as broken, and a general anger at the press. This is a movie that is working through some very turbulent ideas, even for Verhoeven. For most people, this is going to be the one where he steps from necessary provocations for the sake of art into pure bad taste territory. Is this a movie that is so obsessed with its own sick sense of humor that it uses harmful stereotypes of the time to get to a downer ending? Or is it an unforgiving warning about how those stereotypes continue to suffocate the most vulnerable individuals? You could definitely make a case in either direction, but me, yeah, I definitely lean more towards the latter. This movie left me a lot of questions, but here's what I do know. Spetters is a movie that knocks you on your ass and never lets you get up. Just when you think you have a good handle on the movie, fuck you. It is a richly cinematic and daring experience brought to life with wonderfully gritty and raw direction, a talented group of mostly unknown actors, and a killer soundtrack comprised of memorable original compositions and evocative licensed tracks. It's got a tough heart and a cruel sense of humor, but like, come on. This is the kind of shit I live for. Ostensibly, it's about three cool guys with dreams of professional motocross racing who attempt to fight the impenetrable roadblock that is blue-collar life as young men in Rotterdam. They are always affected by the lives of their friends, but each of their arcs exist largely in isolation from the group, involving a couple tertiary characters as they deal with a variety of challenges, including financial instability, abusive parents, oppressive organized religion, life-threatening injuries, homophobia, insecurities, loneliness, materialism, media expectations, violence, suicidal thoughts, and all the other horrible things that you can expect as the protagonist of a Paul Verhoeven movie. They all look up to, you guessed it, Rutger Hauer, who plays a supporting role as this super talented D-bag who is less of a character and more of a parody of monolithic heroism. However, the lead of this film is arguably none of them and is actually Finche, who is half Sandra Dee bombshell blonde bad girl and half seductive hustler who will do whatever it takes to leave her shitty life running her family-owned food truck business. There's a lot of moving parts, but miraculously, it never becomes too much to keep track of. And I think that ultimately that comes down to, 1, the strength of the characters, which I'll get to in a moment, but 2, it follows a pretty easily identifiable structure. The first hour sets things up like a typical sports sex comedy, and the second hour subverts it. At first you see these characters and you're like, okay, I get it. This guy is the hot-headed bad boy with the temper and controlling parents. The ginger is the crazy talented one that is destined to be a star that all the ladies love. And this guy is the submissive loser virgin of the group because, I mean, look at him. And the first half plays out largely as you would expect for this type of movie, but throughout there are little hints of something much realer going on beneath the veneer of exploitation. F goes home, and earlier that day he made a scene in front of his parents and they were embarrassed. And you expect that scene at the dinner table where he's like, "Look, son, you gotta stop all these shenanigans and think about starting a life," or whatever. But then he comes home and his father just beats the shit out of him. It's all very matter of fact the way it's done. In fact, he even hangs his jacket up before doing it, and when he leaves, he says this.
Doe het licht uit.
It's like it's standard procedure. Here's another strange crack in the conventionality of the first hour. When they first see Finche, they all want to have sex with her, and they solve this conflict by, I shit you not, having a literal dick measuring contest. But then what? It's the loser beta that has the longest dick? What a twist. It isn't a big moment in the grand scheme of things, but it makes you stop and go, huh. That's an odd choice. While I was watching and mostly enjoying the first half of the film, the question in the back of my mind was, did they know? Did they know that this is racist, and this is homophobic, and this is misogynistic? And spoilers, they did. The second hour of this film does something that I didn't even think was possible. Spetters might actually be Verhoeven at his most transgressive and anti-authoritarian. And I'm shocked because, you know, that's kind of this guy's thing. The second half of this film is a poetic and painfully honest polyphony of suffering, unfairness, and brutality. It lulls you into this quaint and nostalgic look at adolescence until, and this is the thing I was talking about in the last movie about synchronizing form and content, reality comes barreling in for the audience and the characters at the same time. This shift is very clearly marked during a routine motorcycle practice that quickly goes south. This scene is placed at the exact midpoint of the film, almost to the minute. The popular guy who is super talented is literally at a high point in his life, and it's all about to get fucked up in a matter of seconds. Breaks his spine, loses his talent, girlfriend, friends, and faith almost instantly. Oh, that sucks, but in movie logic, that's just a roadblock that he has to overcome to become a better athlete, right? Right? Huh, the movie's almost over. I wonder when things are gonna start getting better for him. Oh, I see. He met back up with his previous girlfriend and they reconnect, and why is he having a mental breakdown because he can't get an erection? That's not how, you can't do that in a movie. What's going on? Why is he, oh Jesus Christ. Yeah. He fucking kills himself. And the other two characters go down similarly surprising paths in the second half of the film, all of which are incredibly subversive and disturbing, and then when the movie ends, you're just like, fuck, man. What are you supposed to take from this? And for a lot of people, that will be the hang-up. Why be so disturbing when you aren't going to provide an explicit reason for it happening? One, I mean, life isn't that structured and doesn't always give you a reason. Two, you could make the case that the terrible events that this particular character experiences is the result of his heated breakup with his previous girlfriend. The shot that directly precedes the opening of the scene that leads to his injury is of her mysteriously standing in front of a church thinking about him, and maybe this is some sort of divine intervention that she prayed for out of jealousy, which would explain why later she feels really bad about his injury and is trying to be supportive even though he's acting like an asshole, and she also tries to get him to go to the church for healing. But thirdly, and most importantly, there is a reason why all of this shit is so dark and brutal. It's there, it just might take a little bit of thinking and maybe a rewatch or two to pick up on. This is a film about three guys who are surrounded by inaccurate projections of masculinity.
slecht, hè? Die heb ik flink te grazen genomen.
They have Rutger Hauer, who is like the perfect man. Smart, good-looking, funny, he fucks hot chicks, he's cool and talented and rich and popular. They all want to be him. The guys and the girl also really like John Travolta specifically, and they try to be like his characters in Grease and Saturday Night Fever, two movies that people remember for their iconic fun moments, but not the really messed up context they are placed in. Call the film dated, offensive, or mean-spirited all you want. One thing it is not is sloppy. There are so many things that, while crass, are absolutely intentional. Like, let's talk about all the penises in this movie. There are a lot of uncensored cocks in this movie, like, a lot. But notice how whenever they're seen, they're flaccid, and characters are trying to get them hard, or complaining about them not being hard, or aren't shown when they are hard. There is so much insecurity they have around their genitals because that's the man thing. You gotta be that to do the man and have sex with women. And the only time we see an erect penis in the whole movie is when it's in the mouth of another man. If you see that and don't think that Verhoeven is one of the greatest satirists of our time, I really don't know what to tell you, man. Even look at the two halves visually. There is a lot of ascension in the first half and a lot of descension in the second. First hour, walking upstairs, being lifted up, walking from above, talking from above. Second hour, walking downstairs, falling down, riding down, wheeling down. In the first hour, there's this part where they very clearly focus on how Ren puts all of his trophies up at the bar. Second hour, the awards and even the bar itself falls down. First hour, Finche goes on a date and is being lifted into the sky. Second hour, this date happens. And this exact fall is caused by a society that preys upon it occurring in perpetuity. One that willfully underprepares them for reality every single day of their young lives. One that is ensuring that when they are confronted by reality, those confrontations will be as explosive and painful as possible. Yes, the way F finds out he's gay and Ren deals with his injuries are shocking and disturbing, but that's the point. It didn't have to be that way, but if we keep forcing these outdated and harmful stereotypes of masculinity onto these young boys, this shit is inevitable. And that is the reason for all of the supposedly bad taste elements in the film. On top of all of that, you know, as if those themes weren't compelling enough, you also have this huge step up in terms of direction. I think that by this point, Verhoeven has finally gone from a very good director into a flat-out great one. The composition of these shots is just plain incredible. The camera is always viewing the action from a spot that really accentuates the varied geometry of the sets. Like again, the two scenes where F's dad beats him up. The triangular architecture not only links the scenes visually, but makes them feel really claustrophobic and unnerving. Also, in the second one, your eyes are drawn to the thorns, which helps with the religious symbolism in the movie, which, I didn't even talk about that. This movie is so layered, and it's just a joy to think about. It does give Sirius a Clockwork Orange energy, where it is an incredible satire, with tons of dark and shocking moments with a sense of humor that's so bleak you might not even realize how much of it is comedic, and it is essentially a 2-hour setup for one genius and really fucked up punchline that is delivered in the ending of the film. Here, the punchline is, and again, if this seems interesting to you, skip to the next section, that the way the popular guy kills himself is by driving onto the highway, so remembering the pun in the title, the Spetters. But unlike A Clockwork Orange, this film doesn't end with its punchline. Spetters ends on a somber note that still leaves things open to get better. Life will continue, and it will probably be just as hard and unforgiving as it always was, but that doesn't mean we have to stop trying, and in trying, that is where we give our lives meaning.
Zin om mee te rijden?
Waarheen?
Waarheen we maar willen. Nou,
Ik win nog wel eens van hem.
Okay, now all of these movies are pains in the ass to find, but this one might sting the most. Because not only does it deserve to be seen, it deserves to be seen in high quality. If you're wondering why my footage looks like it was smeared in Vaseline, that is because this is the only high quality copy of the film I could find. Netflix? No, but we do have This Is Us. Paramount Plus? No. Peacock has it. Abraham Lincoln vs. Zombies 2012, that is, but not this movie. Hulu? Well, I forgot my Hulu password, but they don't have it. Max doesn't have it either. If you go onto Google and look up the movie's name, the first website for actually accessing the movie is Amazon. Yes, for the low price of just $23, you can own the censored South Korean DVD of this film. Wait, what the fuck? And for the record, the longer version is the original theatrical version. And then the fifth link down is an illegal version. Oh look, Google Play has the movie. Oh. Well, at least they have Tricked, and Elle, and Basic Instinct, and Basic Instinct, and Wait, Blu-ray.com has 2 ways to watch it. Neither of them are Blu-rays, though. This, from what I can tell, is the most recent edition of the full movie, but it's in 480p. TV Guide is next. Alright, that's enough of that. You can't even rent or buy this shit on Amazon Video. That is embarrassing. They will take anything. Literally anything. I mean it. Anything. Hey, that one doesn't look too bad. According to them, Paul didn't start making movies until they started speaking English. We have one final hope for watching this movie online, and that is Matt Sixtube Watch Hot Porn Movie The Fourth Man 1983 The Fourth Man Full Movie Online Video, and Cornell Civil Action for Deprivation Rights. Okay, I think I made my point. I think that The Fourth Man might just be the greatest piece of macho, queer, Catholic, art house horror eroticism that I've ever seen. But first, let's not talk about this movie, not even this director, but a different one, Hitchcock. Hitchcock, allegedly terrible as he was, made some damn good movies. You know, by the time I started watching them, I knew that, adults did some naughty or even bad things, but I didn't realize that a scene in a movie could be about something that it's not. I'm sure anyone with a cursory knowledge of his filmography knows exactly where I'm going with this. I got older, and I noticed what everyone else above a certain age notices when you watch more than, one of his movies. Something darker, something unspoken. I'm of course referring to the man's infamous seamier cinematic obsessions. Blondes, voyeurism, vaguely Oedipal relationships, sadism, a strange fixation on bathrooms. The bathroom. Castration anxiety, and repressed bisexuality. Remember, Hitchcock just barely made it out of the Hays Code, resulting in movies that did push boundaries while still respecting the largely conservative standards of his industry. Verhoeven doesn't care about any of that bullshit. For his final film in Phase 1, Verhoeven highlights what goes on between the lines of Hitchcock's filmography. In short, Verhoeven made the sleazy erotic thriller that Hitchcock never could. You know that famous quote that everyone says, "Implied voyeurism is for pussies." I'll hold off on the pretty obvious Basic Instinct comparisons, because I think this movie does a really excellent job of setting itself apart from the rest of his filmography right from the very first frame. I mean, it starts with an overture. I can't imagine any of his other movies, except for maybe Benedetta doing that. Yes, there is plenty of sex and violence and nudity and dark comedy and satire and religious imagery, but it lacks that pointed edge he usually works with, and there's no way to say that without it sounding like a critique, but it really isn't supposed to be. The movie is this weird post-structuralist funhouse where reality occasionally slips into a dream world, but one where you're never totally sure if it's like some sex fantasy or nightmare. And while we all collectively decide to not think about how similar those two things are, I'll say that that's why I'm actually okay with how blunt it can be at times, because it still has a few underlying mysteries that, while simple, are nonetheless fascinating to watch develop. The basic concept of this movie is rock solid. Geert is an alcoholic Catholic bisexual who meets with Christina, a mysterious cosmetologist and this movie's Hitchcockian blonde. She's filming him at this lecture he's giving in a different city, and then they get introduced to each other, and he's like, oh, I hate sleeping at hotels, and she's like, well, you know, you could always sleep at my place, yada yada yada, you get the idea. He stays with her after because he wants to get closer to this hot guy she knows, but he slowly starts to realize that maybe Christina is hiding something from him while, you know, not hiding anything. And while all of that is happening, Geert is having all of these surreal, disturbing visions which distort his present and hint towards his future. Again, it's a very different movie for Verhoeven, but because of all of that, he gets to do things that he couldn't do otherwise. For starters, I think this is Verhoeven's sexiest movie. I always avoid using that term to describe films because it makes it seem like I'm talking about, like, the attractiveness of the actors or like the amount of skin shown. Like, no, fuck that, I don't give a shit about that. Sure, the fact that these are the three main characters of the movie doesn't, you know, it doesn't hurt, but it's the pace, the build-up, the dialogue, the music, the staging, and the blocking that makes it this way. I'm not exactly sure when we became Puritans about sex in movies, but a movie being sexy is just another form of appeal and is in no way less valid than it being funny or pretty or emotional. Oh, and like you'd hope for this subject matter, the movie objectifies and sexualizes the two dudes equally as much as it does the girl. This is also one of his most stylistically ambitious films. I love all of these impressionistic flourishes he throws in. All of the scenes are super visually distinct, and a lot of that comes down to the lighting and colors, but also the costume design. You've got the dry, desaturated opening few minutes, which instantly draws attention to the two most important female characters in the film, the warm splashes of pink when they first enter the salon, and the cool blue when they're on the beach. It all looks so good. My favorite thing about the costume design is that when you see the footage of Christina's past lives, they don't have to do anything with Sotendek's face. She just looks like a completely different person because we associate her with these single color outfits. It's super well done. And while nearly every film he's ever made does feature religious imagery to some degree, this is probably the most explicit. I only say probably because Benedetta is literally about a bunch of nuns, but with that film it's easy to read it as being about faith and sexual freedom in society rather than religion specifically. Despite how blasphemous it is, this movie is Catholic to its core, and that's where my main interest in it comes from. I would call it a criticism of Christianity, but it really isn't that black and white. Let's call it a strident exploration of Christianity. Verhoeven brilliantly conjures this subtly disorienting feeling that something is always off, that there must be something more going on. It can't all be for nothing. He witnesses so many coincidences that are too perfect to be accidents. It must mean something, and that something must be good. Because, you know, what's the alternative? That shit just happens for no reason, that it's all pointless, that everyone who criticizes you was right, that good people will suffer until they die, and that when they die, that's it, and that we have just as much proof of a vindictive God as we do an all-loving one. And who the fuck wants to think about that shit? I know I don't. Paul Verhoeven's main thesis of this film is that religion, whether logical or not, whether true or not, is mainly used by humans to make sense of their chaotic, cruel existences. In Herat's case, it is Catholicism, and he views his life from that perspective. The Virgin Mary, the baby Jesus, the weird lady, the Red Cross sign, there are so many religious motifs. Even the title, The Fourth Man, which on a literal sense relates to the final conspiracy he settles on in the last act of the film, that Christina is luring him in to be her fourth victim, has an alternate religious meaning to it. In the book of Daniel, 3 men are thrown into a furnace by the king of Babylon, but in that furnace, he sees them standing unharmed, accompanied by a 4th man, described to be the son of gods. That probably wasn't an actual 4th guy in the fire, but simply a manifestation of God's presence protecting the men in the furnace. Heart takes what he experiences and turns them into simple narratives, much like he does when writing his books. Me and Christina are not just 2 flawed people, she's the evil one, and I'm the good one. And a lot of this has to do with the strength of Jeroen Krabbe's lead performance. He perfectly portrays Gerard as this man who always does what he thinks is right, who never doubts the validity of his line of thinking, as outlandish as it can be. While it's always nice to have thoughtful performances where an actor excels in the classical sense, I also love seeing actors unbound by what might come across as silly or unbelievable, because when done well, those create some of the most compelling performances. And he really does make you think, is Hayart insane? Or is he just Catholic? Remember, one of the most crucial elements of the Christian faith, arguably its most pivotal moment, was the violent murder of its Messiah. Not that there isn't more to it than that, not that this disproves Christianity in any way, but Christianity has always provided optimistic explanations of difficult events, so Verhoeven is arguing that maybe the symptoms of faith and insanity could overlap a little bit. But the cool thing is that in the end, there's still a chance that he's right, which is a bit unsatisfying from a narrative perspective, but is vital from a thematic one. God might be real, he might be fake, but we can't know either way for sure. And that is what sends the characters towards their eventual fates. It is not Verhoeven's best work, but it is a damn good film and a perfect one to wrap up the Dutch era of his career. If you are a fan of Hitchcock, of De Palma's films in the early 80s, or you just like trippy ass shit, I seriously can't recommend The Fourth Man enough.
Geen dwergen, geen reus, niks. Maar als ik het dwergenverhaal maar lang genoeg ga vertellen, begin ik het zelf te geloven. Prima! Ik lees van in de krant wanneer je de pijp bent uitgegaan. En dat is, meen ik, de essentie van mijn schrijverschap. Ik lieg de waarheid. Maria, de moeder van God, die heeft me geholpen. Net zolang dat ik zelf absoluut niet meer weet of iets waar gebeurd is of niet. Wat je van de werkelijkheid maakt is oneindig veel interessanter dan de werkelijkheid zelf.
Flesh and Blood is significant to Verhoeven's career in a lot of ways. It's his first movie in English, his last movie with Rutger Hauer, his first box office bomb, but it kind of gets lost in the grand scheme of things because of how culturally significant every other movie in his career is. Which sucks, because while being far from one of his best, Flesh and Blood is nonetheless a super worthwhile addition to his canon. That being said, there is simply no world where I can claim that this film's financial failure is in any way a surprise. This film is essentially a two-faced homage to and parody of a genre that the general public wouldn't get sick of until much later. This film is not the heroic period action epic that the studios and the masses wanted it to be, and instead acts as a deliberately brazen and unsanitized depiction of life in the 1500s. This isn't Lady Hawk, this isn't Conan the Barbarian, and it isn't Excalibur. The top review on Letterboxd describes this as Verhoeven's medieval The Wild Bunch, which puts it pretty succinctly, I think. Even the man himself references that film on the commentary track.
It was about two men, basically a little bit like in The Wild Bunch.
This film views the era it's set in from a much more realistic light. Not that it's free from any historical anachronisms, like, John Hawkwood is in this movie. Bro is off by about a century. It's more that the film doesn't shy away from the grislier, uncomfortable parts of history. It isn't romantic, it isn't heroic, it isn't fantastical. Nothing in the film is idealized. From a directorial perspective, this is one of Verhoeven's most classical, objective outings. It does absolutely have his quirks in it, but it's way less in your face about it. I mean, literally, this is his first film shot in 239:1, the only use of that aspect ratio in the first 9 films of his filmography, and so the characters are physically farther away from the screen. It definitely recalls a lot of those great historical epics of the 60s, but with a nice cynical twist and some 80s sensibilities. Rutger Hauer plays Martin, named after Saint Martin, the only saint with a sword. There's a scene where the priest looks at him with this symbolic halo over him, a sign of God's approval. He inspires a revolution among social outcasts, the thieves, the whores, the poor, the misfits, the ones who would never be inspired to revolt if it wasn't for him. There's also a beautiful, wealthy young princess who is forced into a loveless arranged marriage for him to save. He's strong, he's smart, and he's handsome. But this isn't the 16th century of fairy tales. This isn't the 16th century of Hollywood. This is the 16th century, since that one thing happened, you may have heard of it, of us, of humans, a species which has the power to do great things, but mostly does shitty things. You can't be Taylor Swift about these things. You can't just have the sexy parts of the past, and this movie shows that. This movie is fucking disgusting. People get shot, openly stabbed, hanged, dismembered, blown up for laughs. They stab a dog and chuck parts of its carcass over the wall. This guy gets impaled by 3 large stakes, but he doesn't die instantly from them, and he just has to scream for like a minute while stumbling around in pain. The plague is a constant fear, which we have to see in graphic detail, along with some equally disturbing archaic remedies. It is a gross, disgusting little movie, and it doesn't indulge in these details. They are present constantly, but it doesn't make them fun, it doesn't make them cool. Sometimes it's funny because of how little they value human life, but it's not, like, consistently funny. The gang rape scene is particularly disturbing, and you could make an argument that it does go on for too long, but it makes its statement abundantly clear. While her view may have changed in the last 40-odd years, before release, Jennifer Jason Lee was particularly outspoken about her frustration with the censorship of this scene, and I completely agree. It isn't entertaining, it's super hard to watch, but like, yeah, women's bodies, and especially their virginities, was considered like a currency that soldiers had right to during their plunders. All of this stuff is in these historical epics, but there are few directors brave enough to actually confront them head on. And what is so great about this film is that it manages to act as a parody of a genre by just doing its own thing. The movie doesn't need to dumb itself down. By being so committed to this grimy side of history, it pokes holes in all other medieval epics just by existing. The line that will always stick out to me is this one.
Let's see if this angel bleeds.
This is such a sadistic, brutal scene, perfectly written, acted, and edited to be so difficult to watch. And the worst thing about it is that you know you need this scene because that line is the perfect encapsulation of what this movie is doing. Let's see if this angel bleeds. I'm gonna say it. And I don't know if people are gonna be able to take this, but it's just how I feel. Think about your favorite violent medieval-ish movie from the 80s or 90s, whatever it may be. Conan the Barbarian, Prince of Thieves, Heavy Metal, Highlander. If you're thinking of Ran, that's cheating, but other than that, the movie in your head is probably not that complex. The themes of those movies are probably very tried and true. Honor, freedom, men, order, power. They're basically fairy tales. They might have some really cool extra skins, and unless you were thinking of Braveheart, it's probably not an outright bad movie. But I can assure you that whatever it is about the stories and themes of those movies that you like, it can probably be found somewhere in either the Iliad, Beowulf, or Hamlet. And again, that's fine, that's not a bad thing, but they're angels. They might have hours of loud-mouthed violence, or a magical naked dominatrix lady kicking ass, and full-frontal orgies that escalate into cannibalistic bloodbaths, and that shit can be awesome, but they're not real. Flesh and Blood wants to figure out what makes those movies tick. This line doesn't just refer to the Jennifer Jason Leigh character, it refers to all of the sanitized films with which it shares its subgenre. Do they bleed? Flesh and Blood says yes. It shows that all of the stuff about the times that those movies are set in that they kind of gloss over are as important as the themes that it focuses on. Everything is dirty and gross and unsanitary and miserable. This movie systematically demystifies and confuses each and every one of the things that we love about those movies. It's very unsatisfying at points. When you like Rutger Hauer, he's always losing, and by the time you hate him, he starts winning, and when he fully completes his arc and becomes the villain, he gets to live another day. At first you see Jennifer Jason Leigh, and she's this young girl, and they definitely knew what they were doing casting her, and they're very careful to not say her age, but it's like, you know, she's clearly not an adult, and she's in this arranged marriage to a guy that she just met, and she's pretty, but then she bluntly asks her friend how she can fuck good. Oh, so she isn't so pure of heart, and she's part of the family that oppresses everyone. Okay, maybe she's a bit of a bad girl. But then before we can say that we don't like her, then she becomes the only character that we do like. And then she starts to fight back and act like a badass, but she can't actually win any of those fights, and then she kind of steps into this final girl role, with Rutger Hauer turning into this like slasher movie villain character, and then she escapes and he doesn't die, and the movie ends with her kissing the guy that she was arranged to be married to. It's so deliciously unsatisfying. It's brilliant. However, Verhoeven has said that he thinks this is one of his weaker films, and I have to agree. If I just focus on what I've talked about, then I would love it. But I do have to factor in that there is other stuff going on in the movie, and I don't think it does those things as well as it does the things I just talked about, meaning that those things also don't hit as hard. This is the film that caused the split between Rutger Hauer and Verhoeven, because Hauer kept insisting that his character be more heroic. And yeah, unfortunately, that push and pull does sort of show up on screen, and can make for an uncharacteristically disjointed and confusing watch. And while Verhoeven's disinterest in plot is part of what makes his movies in Phase 1 really special, in this case, I think I would have preferred a story with a little more meat on it. I like that in the halfway point they take back the city and there's a shift in position from offensive to defensive, but I was pretty disappointed when I realized that after this point the drama in the group would mostly be limited to the terrible love triangle that is so passionless and stale. This whole plotline screams studio note, and I wasn't surprised to find out that is actually what it was. It's pretty lame because I feel like the natural direction for the story to go in is for the infighting to divide the group and the previous rulers to use that as a weak spot to attack them. In the first half, the side characters are kind of annoying, but they do have personality, but in the second half, they all just kind of congeal into one big mass to make room for the love triangle. It also gets confusing when you factor in the, communist angle.
No! There's no
Game on! We're all safe. As a token, we should wear the safe.
So, like, so they all don red, and they say there are no classes, free money, everybody owns everything, this is gonna go well.
Hasn't history proven that Marx's vision of an egalitarian utopia is unattainable, inevitably creating an oligarchy more oppressive to the proletariat than the bourgeoisie it vilifies?
I have to pee.
I'll go with you.
If you think I'm reading into this too much, this is also something that Verhoeven talks about on the commentary track. And I just don't exactly see how this fits into the second half, where people are mostly chill as is, and it's just everything outside causing problems. So if you wanted to read this as a communist allegory, which I think the first act does support, the message would be that communism is created by bad people who stay bad, but the society is actually pretty good, but also there's narcissistic leaders still, but people are mostly chill and they don't need free speech, and then everyone dies. Okay, I don't know, it's just, I don't see like a hook to it, it's just kind of there. I don't know, I feel like the central conceit of the film is still very strong, but it should support either a more complex plot or preferably a shorter runtime. Not one of the most memorable ones, but it's an interesting experiment, and I'm happy it exists. Paul Verhoeven's next movie was a small indie drama about the effect that unfettered capitalism has on humanity. What was it called again? I forgot its name. Oh my god! So yeah, this is the part of the video where I talk about RoboCop, a task which I am both very excited about and also definitely dreading. RoboCop is really good, and chances are you don't need me to tell you that. If you know, you know. It's a hard thing to describe. Like, just reading the Wikipedia synopsis for this, you would never guess that this would be the plot to anything other than a generic sci-fi action B-movie. I mean, it's called RoboCop. It's not exactly getting a Criterion entry. Oh. Shit. But RoboCop is so much more than what's on the surface, being one of the most intelligent Hollywood action flicks of all time. Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner's screenplay is one of jolting political literacy, a fearlessly mean and fearlessly funny attack on everything we hold sacred. The world of RoboCop is a truly dystopian nightmare, a Reaganomic disaster on steroids, where corporations and consumers exist in a never-ending toxic cycle, where rampant privatization of public services and gentrification causes a shit ton of crime, which then only fuels corporations to tighten their stranglehold. Dirty, cluttered warehouses contrast open, bright boardrooms. The design of the two robots isn't just incredible and super iconic, it also highlights this dichotomy. Phil Tippett and Craig Davies' Ed 209 design and animation is beyond stellar. I fucking love this thing. Much like OCP, it hides its stupidity and inefficiency under the guise of being big and powerful. It can kill you 100 times over, but it can't go down the stairs. I especially love that we can't see any eyes or sensors on this thing, it just has this big gray visor. It's imposing and pathetic. The RoboCop design, courtesy of Rob Bottin, who is a beast of a special effects artist, is also super cool looking. Yeah, it's kind of easy to criticize it now, seeing it in 4K quality does highlight some imperfections, but design-wise it's great, and combine that with Peter Weller's physicality and performance, it perfectly embodies the mix of humanity and inhumanity that the script calls for. Humble, efficient, but emotionally driven versus bloated, dumb, but emotionless. Emotion is such an important part of this movie. Granted, a lot of the most iconic moments from the film are the ones where RoboCop leans more on his robo side.
Thank you! Thank you!
Madam, you have suffered an emotional shock. I will notify a rape crisis center.
But the ultimate question of the movie is, did Murphy really die when his body died? Is Murphy's soul somehow retained within his RoboCop form, or is he just an assortment of limp body parts for something entirely new? Is RoboCop Murphy's next form, or is he a robot convinced he's a man? It's the Ship of Theseus question. But just because Verhoeven didn't come up with this story doesn't mean this isn't still a very Verhoeven film.
Paul shot it. He was very upset because there wasn't enough blood. I think it was shot about 3 times. And then eventually I just went to a 7-Eleven and I bought a whole bunch of the biggest baggies made, and we filled them full of blood, and I taped them to this poor actor's body, and we lay him on the table, and we just blew the hell out of him. And finally Paul was happy with the shot.
I don't think people give Verhoeven and his editor Frank J. Urioste enough credit for how energetic and snappy this movie is. The action scenes are punchy and tight, the dialogue is fast and sharp, the contemplative scenes are thoughtful but still respect your time. It is just boom, 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 boom. This movie piles one classic scene over the other in a way that makes it look easy. The only scene that goes on a little too long is the death of Murphy, but since this is his motivation for the rest of the film, and it of course acts as his sort of crucifixion moment, it doesn't even bother me. I will now share some of my favorite moments, details, and other shit from RoboCop. I think this first scene in the police station is amazing. It sets up so much without you even realizing. Like, it opens with this.
It's not like he killed someone. This is a clear violation of my client's civil rights.
Make it aggravated assault and I can make bail in cash now.
Listen, pal, your client's a scumbag. You're a scumbag, and scumbags see the judge on Monday morning. Now get out of my police station and take Laughing Boy with you.
This short interaction not only demonstrates the chief's hard-ass attitude, but also shows their respect and disrespect of the law, the fact that crime is a huge problem given how many people you can see in the room around them, and that people who are rich expect to be let off easy. It's like a few seconds, but it establishes all of that. The supporting cast in this movie is solid gold. Look, I'm not going to pretend that any of the non-Murphy characters are particularly developed, but the cast kills it. Kurtwood Smith is hysterical.
Shove enough of this factory so far up your stupid wop ass that you'll shit snow for a year.
Frankie, blow this cocksucker's head off.
Ooh, guns.
Nancy Allen is a badass. Dan O'Herlihy's character doesn't even have a name, and he still has the second best line in the movie. The line in question is in the first Ed 209 sequence, which will never fail to make me laugh, when after the minor malfunction, he says,
Dick, I'm very disappointed.
I mean, it's perfect. The whole movie is perfect. It's RoboCop. How could you not love it? The toxic waste scene is incredible.
Don't touch me, man!
The part where that guy gets shot a gazillion times and then falls out the window to his death, and that one guy is just like... The ending? Absolutely perfect. I would have been fine if this movie ended with a traditionally happy ending. Murphy gets un-RoboCopped, reunites with his family, and they all live happily ever after. It may have felt a bit like a RoboCop out, but I would have accepted it. But instead, they end on this small, honest, and subtle moment that the movie totally earns. Murphy can't regain all that was taken from him. In a society like this, that isn't really possible. But what we can do is celebrate small victories, like in RoboCop's final line.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name? Murphy.
Come on. That's powerful. RoboCop is so good. Of course this is the best one. Of course it deserves its status as one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time and one of the greatest 80s movies of all time. There is something kind of dystopian about this movie being so explicitly satirical and still becoming what it did. RoboCop 2, RoboCop 3, the RoboCop TV series.
Take good care of each other. You are a family.
the heart of the darkness, she's still there.
RoboCop action figures for kids.
RoboCop and the Ultra Police, the only cops with rapid repeat cap firing.
He's unstoppable.
Battling the worst criminals, Headhunter and Nitro.
RoboCop lunchboxes, PG-13 RoboCop remake. All of these feel like things that the first movie would have made fun of. But honestly, I don't really care. RoboCop is one of those rare movies that can survive people being stupid about it. It's such an 80s movie, yet it feels so timeless because we haven't evolved that much.
And third, I want a recount! And no matter how it turns out, I want my old job back!
Ooh. I'm not gonna touch that one. I think this movie's lasting legacy is indicative of what happens when a crew of super talented people come together at just the right time and make something bigger than themselves. It's a movie so perfect, I don't even think they knew how perfect it was. Like, maybe some of you have heard about this, but the movie has a nearly perfect chiastic arc, meaning that the movie's scenes reflect themselves over the runtime, meeting halfway through and reversing. If you've seen the Force Awakens Plinkett review, it's what he was talking about, but like, actually, it actually works. It's a complicated thing, I don't want to get into it here, so I'll link some articles if you want to learn more. The Lee Iacocca Elementary School is a hilarious little detail that was super satirical. Like, in the future, we name schools after the Ford guy. How silly is that? Yeah, that actually happened too. And my favorite detail, the news segments that play in the beginning of the movie, which set up everything you need to know about the world, they say this.
This is Media Break. You give us 3 minutes, and we'll give you the world.
And the news segments end exactly at 3 minutes into the movie. That couldn't have been intentional, right? But it just shows how watertight this entire movie is. It's dark, it's sad, it's hilarious, it's original, it's witty, it's gross, it's timeless, it's gory, it's RoboCop. I have almost no more words for this film. I can't think of a project more deserving of classic status. If you held a gun up to my head and said, name a flaw you have with RoboCop, I would tell you to pull the trigger. Total Recall is a film about Douglas Quaid, a construction worker who longs for more out of life. He goes to Recall, a company that gives you realistic false memories of your dream vacation, but the memory implantation goes wrong. Because it turns out he is actually a secret agent whose mind was previously wiped by the government. Turns out his wife and friends are fake and that he is really part of a larger plot involving a rebellion on Mars. So he travels there, he meets people to save, a sexy lady to accompany him on his adventures, and a tyrannical dictatorship to take down. As he slowly starts piecing together who he was before his memory was wiped, he takes control, gets the girl, stops the bad guy, and saves the world. Total Recall is a film about Douglas Quaid, a construction worker who longs for more out of life. He goes to Recall, a company that gives you realistic false memories of your dream vacation, but the memory implantation goes wrong. Because he ignores every warning about how terrible and unstable the technology is, because he wants to go to Mars. He lives out his action movie dreams where he is a secret agent on Mars, but since he's convinced that his previous life was fake, all attempts to bring him back to reality fail. As his brain slowly fries, he continues to live out this fantastical, psychotic episode, wherein he gains control, gets the girl, stops the bad guys, and saves the world, and then he dies in real life. Total Recall could be about either of these things, but the brilliance of its premise comes from the fact that it manages to be about both. The Red Letter Media guys put this pretty well.
It's brilliant that the movie lets you rate it whatever way you want. You get... If you're a snooty art fucker, you get to watch this. You get to watch this. Yes, that's brilliant. He's dead. I love it. And if you just want a fun action movie, you're like, yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger kicked ass and saved the day. You get to have your cake and eat it too with Total Recall. I like the ending.
All of his work, in one way or another, flips itself back onto the viewers and makes them consider their enjoyment and desires going into the film. But in Total Recall, his method of doing that is not by subverting or denying simple escapism, but by giving into it. I think that far and away this is the Verhoeven film that most people would enjoy. What makes it so great is that it never goes too far in the direction of abstraction or existentialism to turn off the people who just want a fun action movie. It more than meets its red-blooded action quota to entertain our most primal desires for 2 hours, yet it never goes too far in the other direction so that the art house analytical crowd will be turned off by it. If you're one of the people who thinks that Verhoeven is all shock and he just relies on catching you off guard, this movie ain't helping your case at all. It is practically the most standard, predictable action narrative possible, to the extent that the movie literally explains everything that is going to happen in it before the second act even starts.
You are a top operative, back under deep cover on your most important mission. People are trying to kill you left and right. You meet this beautiful, exotic woman.
Come on.
I don't want to spoil it for you, Doug, but you rest assured, by the time the trip is over, you get the girl, kill the bad guys, and save the entire planet.
Again, this guy's really good at his job. Verhoeven had every reason to not be passionate about this one. This is one of only 2 movies in his entire career to not have any overlapping screenwriters with his other films. The satire is much more secondary, and in fact, he turned down the offer at first because, and I love this, because he didn't like science fiction, and he said he would never do another special effects heavy film ever.
Liar!
But you would never guess that based on his work here, because this movie contains some of his most animated and lively sequences. Oh my god, almost every single shot in this movie has some kind of crazy special effect happening. The miniatures, the set design, all the squibs, the animatronics during the decompression scenes, the fucking prosthetics, are you kidding me? This movie is a testament to the staying power of practical effects. This makes the remake they did in 2012 look like an absolute joke. More so than it already was. Arnold gives what I consider to be his best on-screen performance in this film. The T-800 is still probably his best overall character, but performance-wise, he doesn't get better than this. Because he's actually really, really good in this one. He isn't just Austrian muscle man here. In the first act, we see his stoic features and larger-than-life physique reinterpreted into a vulnerable, almost chronically optimistic form. When he says this,
I feel like I was meant for something more than this. I want to do something with my life. I want to be somebody.
you really feel it. Or, I mean, I do. I don't know what you feel, but I mean, I can only speak for myself, and I feel it. And because he's so vulnerable and empathetic, when he does eventually grow into the role of action hero, he earns it. When he starts delivering classic one-liners in the back half of the film,
we're married.
Consider that a divorce.
you feel that too. Also, Sharon Stone is pretty good in this one, but like, yeah, duh, no shit. All of these great elements come together and work towards reinforcing the ultimate metatextuality of Total Recall. Because it's so well acted, and because it's so visually distinct, and because Arnold is so cool, we can't help but appreciate it as spectacle, even if the movie is making fun of us for it. Total Recall gets away with genre deconstruction in a way few films can. In theory, Total Recall does to action what Everyone Says I Love You does to musicals, and Heathers does to teen dramas, and Symbiopsychotaxiplasm does to documentary filmmaking, but in practice, it does have an advantage over those. Usually, my problem with deconstructionist genre filmmaking is that it can feel kind of futile even if I personally love the movies. Like, I talk about Funny Games in like every horror video I do, but Funny Games, as much as I will sing its praises, does have a fundamental problem, that the people who really need to see it will hate the movie. That is both the point and the problem, and, you know, you have to weigh those two things out. I mean, most normal people wouldn't put Everyone Says I Love You into their list of favorite musicals, you know? Like all of Verhoeven's films, this movie does contain very clear satirical elements. In this case, it shows how wealthy people will do everything in their power to stay wealthy, even if that means denying marginalized people their most basic rights, along with some subtle hints of the media serving as a form of propaganda for corporations. But in this film, it's much more in the background than in RoboCop and Starship Troopers, a fact which on my first watch kind of disappointed me, but that's a bit absurd because this isn't those movies already exist, and this is just doing its own thing, and I like that. The topics of interest in this movie are much broader but no less fascinating. If I had to put it into words, I would say that this movie is ultimately about ethics and morality and its relationship to memory. Arnold spends the whole movie trying to get back his memory, and when he does, he finds out that maybe he wasn't a good person. But you know what? Fuck that. He doesn't want to be that person. He doesn't want those memories. Even if the memories of Douglas Quaid are completely fake, they still inspire him to be a good person and fight for freedom, and that is who Douglas Quaid is. He doesn't want to be a murderer, and he'll do everything in his power to avoid that, even if that means breaking his arm restraint and stabbing an innocent scientist through the neck with a metal pole and shoving this pipe right through another guy's skull. This movie's so awesome, you guys. I initially had this whole section written where I was acting like a pedantic ass and making fun of the movie's bullshit science, and it was funny, but like, it didn't feel right. People don't like this movie because it's scientifically accurate. Like, of course they don't.
The whole core of Mars is ice.
They like it for the big emotions tied into deep philosophical questions, and they want to see the governor of California wrestle Michael Ironside on this rising platform and for him to get his arms brutally torn off. And because of that, I don't think this has the meat to rank it among one of Verhoeven's best, but it's still a great time. It kind of sucks that the conversation around Basic Instinct mostly involves less than 3 seconds of actual screen time, because believe it or not, there's a whole movie attached to it, and it's pretty good. Basic Instinct is a personal favorite of mine, a twisty, irreverent, kind of trashy but intelligent erotic thriller that keeps you guessing right up until the very last shot. This is the first Verhoeven film to be written by Joe Eszterhas, who is a screenwriter that I have very mixed feelings on, and in general, I think that's true of most people. At his best, he has a really natural way of modernizing pulp for the big screen and is pretty good at stringing a plot along without it feeling too dragged out. At his worst, and honestly, even at his best, his work rings of misogyny and a lack of creativity. He does seem like a nice guy based on what I've read about him, and he definitely isn't lazy. The only thing I definitely don't like is that he apologized for Showgirls after making it. Like, however you feel about this movie, Paul Verhoeven took it like a champ, and Eszterhas kind of didn't. I shit you not, 2 years after the movie came out, he went on the Washington Post and was like, I wrote that in a very dark time in my life, and it was all a mistake, and it was all bad, but also the casting and the music was bad too, and that was the real problem. Like, maybe he does feel that way, I don't know, but don't throw your composers and actresses under the bus. Not only was this 2 years after making the movie, but it was the same year he wrote an Alan Smithy film, Burn Hollywood Burn. You know, one of the worst screenplays of all time. Whatever, in general, he just seems to be the least self-aware out of all of Verhoeven's regular screenwriters, but there's no denying that these two are a killer combination, and the two features they made together are two of the most talked about films of the 90s, and rightfully so. With this one, don't get it being called an erotic thriller, confuse the fact that this film is wholly disconnected from the tropes of conventional eroticism. It even opens with the least erotic thing of all, a sex scene. A lady who looks an awful lot like Sharon Stone rides this retired rock and roll star, and then she stabs him with an ice pick, accompanied by some pretty gnarly gore courtesy of effects genius Rob Bottin. Now, first of all, honestly, that's a perfect way to go out, no notes. But secondly, this seems like a pretty open and shut case. We never actually see the lady's face, but all clues lead to it being Sharon Stone. She was having sex with the guy, she was with him that night, she wrote a book about a retired rock and roll star murdered by his girlfriend with an ice pick, her college counselor was also killed in the same way, are you kidding me? But the best detective on the field has his doubts. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding with that one. Michael Douglas's character, Nick, is pretty awful at his job.
No bruises on the body. It ain't the mag. Never know. Sorry.
I like that part, it's funny. But yeah, he's a drunk, he thinks with his wiener, he lets his emotions get in the way, he tries to assault his boss in his office in the middle of the workday. This scene definitely veers off the line of consent, he gets his buddy killed, he asks some of the dumbest questions, he gives off a general aloofness in every scene, and as his friend puts it in one of the best lines in the movie,
Well, she got that magna cum laude pussy on her that done fried up your brain.
but Michael Douglas really isn't alone in this regard. All of the men in this movie are incompetent, dumb, rude, corrupt, they all suck. Most importantly, they all hold positions of power, and they think that because of that power, they can get away with doing bad things, and as we see in the film, for the most part, they're not wrong. Oh my goodness, a world where powerful men are presumed innocent from any wrongdoing because they are powerful men? Imagine that, wouldn't that be crazy? Before the start of the film, Nick accidentally shot 2 tourists while he was high on cocaine. His punishment? He has to see a counselor, who he then has sex with, which, you know, is technically her violating the ethics of her job, so the blame would be put on her as long as it's consensual, and then he keeps having sex with her when she repeatedly tells him to stop. His punishment? Uncomfortable pillow talk. And then he shoots her because he's a terrible cop and he thinks that she has a gun in her pocket even though he has no reason to believe she does, and she doesn't. His punishment? He doesn't get to have sex with her anymore. Of course, the only time skirting proper procedure is a problem is when his file gets leaked and it hurts his feelings, so then he's all on his good guy shit and he barges into the lieutenant's office and is like,
Catherine Trammell, how much did she pay you?
his punishment? He gets placed on leave for a little bit, so now it's harder for him to break the law, but he still does it.
You're not even supposed to be here. Come on, Sam, it's going to take a minute.
There are so many examples of this happening in the film, both overt and subtle, with this guy and all other men, and we'd be here all day if I listed all of them. The final one I want to draw attention to is in the beginning of the film with the murder. This one guy makes a silly joke while they're investigating the crime, and then this guy is like,
This is sensitive.
oh, you know what? Yeah, I guess that was kind of shitty. He's right. We should be more respectful. What does he say next?
Mr. Boz was a major contributor to the mayor's campaign. He was chairman of the board of...
Oh, that's why.
A civic-minded, very respectable rock and roll star.
Oh, what's that over there?
Looks like civic-minded, very respectable cocaine.
Listen to me, Curran. I'm gonna get a lot of heat on this. I don't want any mistakes.
While this isn't outright said, I can't be the only one who read the subtext of this scene as sweep the coke under the proverbial rug, deal with the murder. It's very clear and it's very bleak. But while this makes the patriarchy an omnipowerful entity, it makes the men within it all the weaker. All of that cool factor, all of that dominance, all of that strength, all of that power, all of that intelligence, all of that intrigue that the Michael Douglas character might give off in the beginning, gone. And what is their kryptonite?
It's nice.
I'll let you decide. Sharon fucking Stone as Catherine fucking Trammell. Oh my god. Holy crap. Easy top 5 Verhoeven characters for me, easily, and probably top 2, 3 performances. It's a close call. This lady commands the screen from her first line. Hell, her first close-up. When I saw this, I was like, oh yeah. Something's gonna be up with her. We don't find out exactly what until the final seconds of the film, but she rides that line perfectly in every scene. Like The Fourth Man, this is a film about a Hitchcockian blonde who is either a psychopathic murderer or a very unfortunate victim of circumstance. And while I thought that Sotendek did very well in that role, it isn't even close. Stone just leaps off the screen here in a way that so few actors can, a quality that makes the ultimate sleight of hand trick this movie pulls all the more satisfying. Part of me isn't really sure how in on it Joe Eszterhas was. In his mind, is this just an edgy, morally gray story about an honest cop who is seduced by a succubus, a depraved bisexual fiend? Did he just get real lucky that he got this really talented crew to elevate his simple story into a metatextual social satire? And I'm kind of torn on it, because I actually accessed the original script for the film, and there is a lot of it that seems to suggest that this very much isn't the case. Most of the meta aspects are in the script. She's still an author, she still writes trashy airport paperback thrillers, she still talks about Nick like he's a character, and there's still the two fades to black in the ending. A lot of the most clever lines are his doing, and for the most part I do think that this is the best screenplay of his that I've seen. Usually when people think of good writing, they think of this man, but this is my favorite kind of screenplay, where the people are kind of cold and they speak in short sentences that let the audience interpret what the character is thinking based on their actions and the way that they are delivered.
Did you kill Mr. Boz, Mr. Amell?
I'd have to be pretty stupid to write a book about killing and then kill somebody the way I described it in my book. I'd be announcing myself as the killer. I'm not stupid.
We know you're not stupid, Mr. Amell.
Maybe that's what you're counting on to get you off the hook.
Writing the book gives you an alibi. Yes, it does, doesn't it? But the answer's no. I didn't kill him.
It's a hard thing to pull off, but when you see it done well, it can be really effective. And for a thriller where nothing is as it seems and you can never tell if someone is lying or not, it works really well. When you look at the story from afar, it isn't even that complex, but it's the way that the information is slowly doled out to the characters over time, both on the investigative side and the interpersonal side, that keeps the story feeling fresh throughout. Whenever the movie looks like it's about to stagnate, it throws in a new curveball or complication that keeps you invested in it. The screenplay also does have the San Francisco setting, which to his credit is a genius idea, giving the entire experience this undercurrent of danger. Or maybe he just didn't realize that having unprotected sex in the 90s in San Francisco reads a little differently. So there are things that Eszterhas does deserve credit for, but on the other hand, something about it just makes me think that he didn't realize the qualities that Verhoeven really brought to the surface. I really can't say with my full chest that I think Eszterhas understood how despicable of a character Nick is when he wrote him. I think that to some extent he did write an above-average screenplay here, but it was everyone else on the movie who elevated into being great. Even in small ways like this very telling grammar mistake that Catherine makes early on in the film.
If I was guilty and I wanted to beat that machine, it wouldn't be hard.
In the screenplay, this line is slightly different, with it originally saying, "if I were guilty." I'm sure this change wasn't super thought through, it probably just sounded more natural on set, but for her to use the wrong mood when describing a hypothetical scenario, and she's an author, which would usually call for subjunctive like it is in the script, makes for a very clever bit of foreshadowing. It's also worth mentioning that he is not responsible for the film's most iconic moment, and that is based on a real experience that Verhoeven had at university. I think that scene works fantastically, it's so fucking funny. And of course, this movie would not be the same without Sharon Stone, who gives even the smallest lines so much texture. If she was bad, the movie would not work. If she was good, it would work, but she goes beyond great, and as such, this movie fucking soars so much higher than it has any right to. It's so good. I'm sorry, Stanley, I love you. I know you cast him because of the Illuminati Scientology lizard people from NASA, but these are who you should have cast for Eyes Wide Shut. I honestly could not agree with this one Letterboxd review more. Verhoeven knew exactly what this film needed. He pulled his longtime DP Jan de Bont out of directing duties and back into doing the role of cinematographer, and I think that as impressive as his work on The Hunt for Red October was, this might actually be his best work. This movie looks smooth as hell. I just like so much about this movie. It feels ahead of its time, it's bold, it's funny, it's creative, it's clever, it's well directed, the car chases are shockingly great, the music is fantastic, the editing is outstanding, it's just such a watchable movie. All of my problems with this movie are pretty nitpicky and minor, but I do have them. In contrast to Showgirls, which is a pretty accurate depiction of its subject matter, it kind of seems like Joe Esterhaz did zero research when writing this screenplay. Everyone, and I mean every character in this movie, uses the word alibi wrong. Like, an alibi is a piece of evidence that proves that someone wasn't at the scene of a crime, but in this movie, they keep saying that Catherine just wrote the book as an alibi. Okay. Secondly, even by 1992 standards, the sex scene in the opening of the film is like the most vanilla shit ever, and the fact that this movie seems to think that this is like some sadomasochistic relationship is kind of embarrassing. Like, she ties him up for a second, and Joe Esterhaz seems to think that that is the freakiest shit ever. Also, like, why wouldn't you do any DNA testing? Maybe don't have literally everyone in the office know of Nick's very obvious conflicts of interest in this case. I think the film's heavy reliance on surprising story turns means that it will never really hit as hard on a rewatch or if you know where the story is going, unless you are interested in the technical acting or satirical qualities. So it works for me, but if you need a super meaty, consistent story, you might not find yourself as dazzled by this one. But I love this shit.
She seduces people. It was internal affairs, wasn't it? She manipulates people. Freeze! How much did she pay you? You wanna play her? Come on! She knows where I live and breathe.
Games are over, Nick.
Basically, a high-budget porno film, Showgirls is a thinly veiled excuse to show lots of naked buttocks, legs, and breasts. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give it a 10.
There isn't anything original.
No,
in this
there
picture.
isn't.
There's
I
not
didn't
a
say there was.
The controversial softcore porn movie called Showgirls.
It's the most talked about movie of our time.
Think you're gonna see this one?
No. I should say not.
I know you won't, Chad.
I promise you, Marcy, not even get near that one.
But one movie wears its NC-17 label proudly, and that's about all it's wearing.
We must hold Hollywood and the entire entertainment industry accountable for putting profit ahead of common decency.
It was absolutely hell on earth. I mean, it was hell on earth.
Question that people who are creating this material ought to ask: what is the message we're sending out to our sons and daughters?
Great deal of nudity, lewd behavior, a lot of very peculiar sexual behavior. I want to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. It was all I could do to sit through the second show. It was.
In celebration of the film's 30th anniversary, Stephen Bauer told The Hollywood Reporter about an interaction he had with Martin Scorsese after a screening of Scarface. He said, "They are going to hate this movie in Hollywood." Bauer asked why. Scorsese said back, "Because it's about them." On an unrelated note, Showgirls was one of the worst reviewed films of all time when it came out. People fucking hated this one. It swept the Razzies, with Verhoeven being the first director to accept the award in person.
Thank you very much. The worst thing happened to me today. I got 7 of the worst awards. And I'm very happy because it was much better, much more fun than reading the reviews in September. Thank you so much.
The Oscars made fun of it.
What were they thinking? Well, come on, I haven't seen that many Poles mistreated since World War II.
The Simpsons made fun of it.
Wow, this is the greatest gift any wife has ever given her husband.
I thought you'd like it, and I'm enjoying the friendship between Showgirl and that seamstress.
Everyone made fun of it.
We now return to Showgirls.
Yeah!
On TBS.
But that's the gamble that Verhoeven and Esterhazy made with Showgirls. They made a movie with an almost suicidal level of ambition. This movie is rude, unfiltered, campy, excessive, absurd, and is completely unafraid to be so. Of course, they did that with a point which most people seem to miss. Part of me thinks it's just us dumb Americans who can't handle seeing a pussy on screen, but something about this movie ignited a fire within culture, going beyond just being explicit and entering a whole new realm of reality outside the lines of good or bad taste. Unlike the next movie, where I still honestly have no idea how the movie got the poor reception it did, with this one, I kinda get it. I don't agree, but I get it. Infamously given an NC-17 rating, the film was a Hail Mary to bring sex back to screens in America, and it failed. Hard. But over the years, the reputation has really swung back strong on this movie, with people declaring it to be a cinematic masterpiece and the greatest Verhoeven film of all time. Up front, I'll say I'm not one of those people, but I still think the movie is very interesting. If Total Recall was Verhoeven giving in to what the audiences want, this film is going as far in the other direction as the studios will allow. This movie spits back the audience's desires right in their face in almost every scene. So let's just jump into it, guys. Now, first, I gotta say, I really like the opening. It's like an indie movie, it just kind of starts. There's no music, just really natural ambiance and the sounds of the highway as she tries to hitchhike to Vegas. Also, I really like this outfit she wears, a fringed leather black jacket and washed out blue jeans. It adds to her man with no name cowboy feel. It helps with the mystery that her character's past retains throughout most of the runtime. Showgirls is about Nomi Malone, and if that name is too subtle for you, I'll let you know that this character is running from a dark past.
Place of birth.
New York.
New York, New York?
Yeah.
Nearest family members.
I don't have any family.
Deceased?
Yes.
She is played by Elizabeth Berkley, who was at the time mostly known for her role on the wholesome family-friendly show Saved by the Bell.
Of course, you're a girl, so it's not like you could hit it anyway.
Okay, show me your tits.
She was a pretty big target for the movie's hate at the time, with people lamenting how awful she was in it. The main subject of her ridicule being this early scene where after she gets her shit stolen, she eats fries in a very abusive manner.
What's in your suitcase? Nothing, just my stuff. Everything I had. I just got here.
Now, this scene out of context is pretty silly, but I do think that Elizabeth Berkley's performance in this movie is better than people give it credit for. It's easy to overlook this fact within the larger context of Verhoeven's career, but this guy does ask a lot more from his actors than most directors in the States do. Whether it's intentional or not, he is drawn to screenplays with very demanding lead performances, this film included. So while I'm not gonna sit here and say that this is a great performance. This is a lady in her early 20s going up against goddamn Isabella Huppert, so, you know, I don't envy her position. And while she frequently wanders into looking ridiculous territory, she is at all times 100% committed to it. And on that level, you have to respect it at least a little bit. The unsung hero of this movie is definitely Gina Gershon. Like, nobody talks about her, and that's so strange because she steals every scene she's in. But going back to Know Me, we get something of a thematic statement early on in the film when she wins a bunch of money at the slots and then loses it all. Also, this guy's like, hey babe, I could get you some money, and she storms away. Because in this movie, Nomi keeps trying to prove that she isn't a whore. Because, of course, being a whore is the worst thing you can be. And then we learn later in the movie, Nomi used to be a prostitute before coming to Vegas. So in a way, her decision to become a dancer was her trying to move away from that life, and she goes out of her way to prove that she's different. But is she? If I were to name a single theme for this movie, it would be exploitation. The argument is that whether you're grinding your sweaty naked body on high-paying men, or the star of a lavish, high-budget topless dance show, you're still being exploited, just in marginally different ways. This movie goes about proving this by mixing campy and absurd moments in an overall very thoroughly researched and straightforward depiction of the lifestyle that Nomi leads. Is Showgirls the worst movie of all time? No, far from it. On the whole, I think it's definitely above average. This movie's got a lot of style, a lot of memorable moments, and a lot to say. If it needs to be said, technically the movie is incredible. You've got Joost Vacano as DP, who always brings his A-game. This is Verhoeven's second time working with costume designer Ellen Marajnik, and this is a huge step up from her already impressive work on Basic Instinct. The guy from Eurythmics is doing the score. Like, these people know what they're doing. Is the film perfect? No. The movie does have flaws that hold it back from being one of his best, but it's not the flaws that the people who reviewed the movie when it first came out fixated on. For starters, something about Verhoeven's direction in this movie just doesn't do it for me in the same way he usually does. I can't exactly put my finger on why, I just think it comes down to a taste thing. It's just a bit more flat, you know? While Gina Gershon delivers one of my favorite performances in the movie, I think this particular film is a case where Verhoeven was unable to work around Esterház's misogyny. The homoerotic relationship between Nomi and Crystal works fine on a story level, I get it, but for a screenplay that is otherwise as exhaustively researched as this one, it kind of feels like Esterház was probably like, no, but I get lesbians. I know what they're like. I can write a lesbian. It's a girl who likes a girl. How hard could it be? Watch this.
I like nice tits.
Boom, it's lesbian. I actually have no idea what Joe Esterház sounds like, but I feel like he probably sounds like that. And of course, if there's one thing we all know about lesbians, it's that they're a fan of having really long nails. Lesbians. Long nails on all 10 of their fingers. Is that supposed to be like a dumb joke, or is he really that stupid? You don't see how that could be a conflict of interest at all? I don't know. Anyway, also, I know that the Molly character wasn't written with a black actress in mind, but for a director who already doesn't have the best history when it comes to treatment of women of color, I think the fact that Molly's fate is so cruel and fucked up, like, I get it mostly works, but it just doesn't sit well with me. I also think that this movie is a bit too long. Like, it isn't that long, but for a movie like this, I think 2 hours and 10 minutes is pushing it a little bit, and I think the story only gets really interesting in the second half. The first half is more entertaining, but you could trim some of this stuff. But, of course, almost none of these things were the complaints brought up in reviews at the time, and if they were usually tied to some larger complaint about the movie being too sexual or a threat to American values.
Will you get these fucking kids out of here?
You said the F word. You said the F word. You said the F word.
Shut the fuck up!
I think in general, Hollywood was gunning for Showgirls, and a lot of people wanted it to be a disaster that it really wasn't. You know, Hollywood in 1995 wasn't the same as it was in 92. Basic Instinct was the 4th highest grossing movie of the year it came out, but across the top 10 highest grossing films of 1994 to 1996, the most sexually explicit movie out of these 30 is probably Jerry Maguire. Which is a movie I wouldn't show to a 6-year-old, but like, it ain't pushing any boundaries. This was also the era of Bob Dole's reign too. People had it out for this movie.
Those are people who want us to know less.
Yeah, they are afraid of reality. Of course.
Bob Dole.
Yeah.
Afraid of reality?
Yes.
Mr. Verhoeven, I'm sorry, but you've gone too far.
Now, some in the industry may wish to produce movies that are degrading, debasing, tawdry, second-rate, and anti-heroic. But I would ask them to spare us the market made me do it excuse, because this is a free country. No one is forcing you to do anything.
Of course, I'm not trying to suggest that anyone who dislikes this movie is somehow anti-sex. Like, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But me, I think it's a good time, and definitely smarter than people usually give it credit for. Not just in the satire, but even in the humor. Like, this movie is way funnier than I expected it to be.
Must be weird not having anybody come on you.
Like, just because this movie has a lot of very serious moments and is an overall dark commentary on exploitation, doesn't mean that everything is supposed to be 100% serious. Like, this is obviously at least a little tongue-in-cheek. Also, y'all are haters, the monkey part was funny. Like, my favorite scene is hands down the audition one with this asshole director who is just such a hateable bastard.
Take a look at these tits. What are these, watermelons? This is a stage, babe, it's not a patch. See ya. Can you spell MGM backwards? I bet you can't.
MGM.
I'm impressed. Come back when you fuck some of this baby fat off.
He is just so crude and upfront about what he wants that I think it's really funny. And I like that all of the jokes in this scene are at his expense. Like when he kicks out one of the ladies because she's been to too many technique classes, and then he singles out Nomi because she hasn't had enough. Like, he's always the dumbass in the room. But even then, that scene ends with her feeling pressured into doing something she really doesn't want to do in front of everybody, and the scene shifts along with it, and suddenly he isn't a funny monster, he's just a monster. Basically, every man in this movie is some version of shitty. I mean, the most likable man in this whole movie would probably be Glenn Plummer as James Smith, this dance choreographer that Nomi crosses paths with a few times.
Man, everybody got AIDS and shit.
But I could imagine this guy being the main villain of another movie. He's pretentious, obnoxious, a terrible employee, and he views women as disposable. And he's only elevated to being the nicest guy in the movie because A, everyone around him makes him seem less bad in comparison, and B, he's just kind of sad. One of the best details in this movie is how it goes out of its way to show that he's not actually untalented. He apparently studied with Alvin Ailey in New York, and of course, doing something in New York and then doing the same thing in Vegas could breed very different reactions. And that's kind of the theme of the movie, that ultimately they are the same. Sure, Goddess might have all the glitz and glamour, all done up with lavish production, a crew of professionals, and a healthy amount of pyrotechnics, but the film's framing of the scene between Nomi and Elle, you know, before it becomes the funniest thing ever, makes something very clear. James was right.
You don't want to be in this kind of show. What you're doing, at least it's honest. They want tits and ass, you give them tits and ass. Here, they pretend they want something else, and you still show them tits and ass.
In Cheetah, the gentleman's club that she starts at, things might be crappy, but it has a sort of sincere charm after seeing the depths that Nomi will be forced to sink to later in the film. The room is cramped and claustrophobic, but everyone seems comfortable around each other. The lights are all over the place, but they give off a DIY scrappy efficiency in the same vein as Henrietta's janky dress apparatus. The boss is similarly creepy and rude, but he also seems to have a distinct chemistry with the women he employs.
She's going down to the Stardust. She's gonna be in the show.
Well, good for her. La-di-da-di-da-di-da. She'll be back.
That can't exactly be said about the other guy.
I don't care whether you live or die. I want to see you dance, and I want to see you smile.
While the dressing room of the Goddess show, yes, is nicer looking, more spacious, probably safer, but it's also less homely. They show its abrasive quality not just in the obvious ways like the physical violence and monkeys, but also with these small moments, like when Nomi is first getting her tour as a dancer, the choreographer has to take down the name of the showgirl who used to occupy her space. Everyone's always on edge, constantly snapping at each other, and we don't blame her for being drawn to the second one where she doesn't have a boss who's constantly like this.
Not even if you give me a fucking blowjob!
But her idea that it's kind of a step up and that she's being less exploited, horseshit. They're just less honest. They're just less honest about. Holy fuck. They're just less, they're just less honest. Honesty is really what separates characters in this movie. Nomi gets mad that these guys treat her like a sex doll.
Have some lobster, hear Caesar sing. You ever heard Caesar sing? Man, that guy's great. You'll love it.
And this guy is way better, and he'll get me a job, and he wants to have sex with me because he likes me, and he says that those other guys are totally not okay. But then...
You did good. I'll call you for dinner. We'll have some lobster. Hey, did you ever hear Caesar sing? You'll love it.
Oh, alright, but Nomi is nothing like Crystal. Crystal is evil, and Nomi is way different. You know what? I'm gonna get her job, and I'm gonna be nothing like her. Got your job, I'm gonna be better, ha ha ha.
How do you think I got my first lead? There's always someone younger and hungrier coming down the stairs after you.
Oh, fuck. The entertainment industry is nothing but a never-ending state of arrested development. You can tell yourself, hey, I'm playing a different game now, but if you're at the casino, the house will always win. But for a moment, it looks like Nomi might be able to break out of this oppressive system. She reaches a breaking point. Her friend, the only good person in the movie, is viciously gang-raped by a group of high-profile celebrities, only for this guy to be like, wow, that sucks, but we can't tell anyone about it, but we'll pay her enough and it'll all be fine. So she spits in his face, kicks the fucking shit out of the guy who did it, and she takes off, finally realizing that she is playing a game you can't win without being exploited. She's back where she started, hitchhiking, coincidentally running into the exact same guy, and as the car drives away, we see an advertisement for her show, only to reveal one last kick in the balls in its final shot. Her destination? Los Angeles, California. And we know that nobody gets exploited there, and that's the kicker. If Hollywood already didn't hate this movie because of the sex, because it attracted a lot of negative attention, because it ruined the potential for NC-17 movies to ever be viable, because it shoved Jesse Spano's boobs in their face, because it was written by the richest screenwriter in Hollywood who everyone hated, the movie ends by saying, fuck you. This is you. It's a flawed movie. It's hard to love. It's a lot of things. But in the words of the great Nomi Malone,
it doesn't suck.
But what a sad waste of talent and human energy. Is that what women have been fighting so hard for all these years? The right to be degraded and exploited for profit? I don't think so.
Does Bob Dole really, in all sincerity, think that if he fixes Hollywood, like you fix a dog, if you fix Hollywood, that things in American society will be solved? He knows that the problem is not there.
Hello! We're here because we, love our planet.
Just out of curiosity, we could use the cards to buy gum, then immediately quit the army, right?
You know, playing you off for chumps.
Correct. There's no obligation. Unless, of course, war were declared.
What's that?
War were declared.
Starship Troopers can be a difficult film in a lot of ways. To me, this is by a wide margin Verhoeven's most depressing film, and it does that by somehow being one of his most rousing and optimistic. Starship Troopers is yet another Verhoeven film that's release was the victim of an easy, compelling narrative that the media just ran with. In this case, that the film was trying to be a fun shoot-'em-up action sci-fi movie while unknowingly sporting a fascist-adjacent rhetoric. Now, that's horseshit. I can see why some people would get confused by it, but I really don't know why so many people bought into that line of thinking. I'm starting to realize that a lot of people are kind of inept when it comes to identifying satire in film when it isn't overtly, obviously comedic at every point. Like, alright, I guess George Orwell can just go fuck himself. And even the ones who did seem to think that the satire was somehow limited to just the interstitial segments, when in reality, the whole movie is satirical to its core. The film is based on what I will generously call a politically challenging sci-fi novel. Author Robert Heinlein's politics are already all over the place, but Starship Troopers blurs the line between just being, you know, conservative and being fascist. You know, I don't like the author, so I don't really give a shit enough to continue reading into him and try to figure out if it's, if I think it is fascist or isn't. But it is undeniably a very right-leaning story that takes ultranationalism, excessive militarism, and corporal punishment as presupposed things, with many people arguing that it drifts off into more extremist ideals. One of these people was named Paul Verhoeven, who has been completely blunt about the fact that he does not like the source material at all. And instead, what he was going to do, along with his screenwriter Ed Neumeyer, who actually finished reading the book, was use Heinlein's story against him, doing justice to his ideas and showing just how shitty they can really be. And somehow, basically nobody caught this. Now it's a cult classic and a movie that people give a lot of credit to, but at the time, none of that shit was happening. If I had to take a guess, and really, again, I just don't know, I might say that it's because maybe they just decided this opinion while they were watching the movie and either missed or didn't have any interest in engaging with the final moments of the film that really ties everything together. The end of Starship Troopers is another one of the propaganda reels inspiring people to join the Federation and fight for the cause, the twist being that it directly references the events and characters in the movie we just saw. This final moment reframes the whole movie, revealing its true nature. Starship Troopers is an in-universe propaganda film. It is a film made by or in close proximity with the military to promote itself. This is the film that young boys and girls within the Starship Troopers universe will watch and, you know, presumably get inspired by. It's about a bunch of kids just like you who all do their part and save the world. These characters all have the most basic desires. I want to be popular. I want to get good grades so I can have a good future. I want to be a badass at sports. I want the opposite sex to be attracted to me. I want my teachers to shut up. I want to be a hero. I want freedom. I want love. I should go to war. And the sickest thing is that it works. The movie is so broad that you're going to see some part of yourself in at least one of these characters, whether you like it or not. Intellectually, you could say, oh my god, these guys look like Nazis, they're jingoistic, brainless, boring, but you still transpose yourself onto these Aryan fucks like a teenage girl watching Twilight. This film doesn't exist to remind people that war is bad. It exists to remind people how easy it is for others to be indoctrinated into thinking otherwise. Not just with advertisements promoting these ideas, but with entertainment. The most obvious comparison I can make is Independence Day, a sci-fi movie that came out around the same time. It is basically Starship Troopers, but done straight. Yes, sit back and watch the bright colors, mass destruction, and William Smith being cool, and completely ignore any political subtext. And yeah, that's the point. Independence Day isn't a political movie, it's a normal action movie that just might, in the process, remind you of how awesome America is and how our values are so great that not only do they defeat the aliens, but will humble every other pathetic country so hard that they will celebrate our Independence Day with us. The parents are maybe the strongest examples of this.
Johnny, people get killed in the federal service.
Who gave you this idea? It's that teacher, isn't it? There should be a law against using a school as a recruiting station.
No, Ratchak doesn't do that at all. He sort of discourages you.
Well, that's good. Because you're going to Harvard, and that's the end of it.
It's my decision, not yours.
Common in works with a very obvious political agenda, they will cast one or two characters to be like the voice of the people who oppose the message of the work. They repeat the arguments that the viewers they are trying to persuade will hear when they go into the real world, but in situations designed to prove them wrong or make them look stupid or evil or whatever.
As a Bible reader,
Excuse me, I'm a Bible reader too. I go to church, and our church is one of the biggest supporters for this marathon. So what are you trying to say?
Well, I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and we believe the Bible teaches sex is for a man and a woman who are married.
intolerant people.
Wow. That sure took courage.
That is the role that Rico's parents serve in the film. Of course their anti-military stance isn't developed with any depth because that would go against the point of this propaganda film. I also love the world building around the Klendathu arachnids, which is in some way, you know, props to the novel, but I also think that the reason why I like it is mostly the movie's doing. I like the fact that they're just bugs, like big space bugs. I'm sure that when What's-His-Face came up with that concept, he thought he was the smartest bastard ever, but in the hands of Neumeier and Verhoeven, they highlight how stupid it is. It's such a crass concept, humans fighting giant space bugs with big guns. Sure, there are jokes for us watching it on, you know, Earth in current year, but within the logic of this being a propaganda film, they can't acknowledge its own absurdity because then the people watching it might think that the war is stupid, which it is. They're bugs.
Let's talk about you doing this. And I came in and I said, I gotta ask you a question. And Paul's very much in charge of what he does, Verhoeven is. I said, could you explain to me why you're doing a right-wing, fascist, you know, movie based on this book? And he says, you asking me questions? Are you challenging? I said, yeah, I want to. He says, okay, one time. He said, I tell you. He says, if I tell the world that a fascist way of doing things doesn't work, nobody will listen to me. He says, so I'm going to make a perfect fascist world where everyone's beautiful, everything's shiny, everything has big guns and fancy ships, but it's only good for killing fucking bugs.
Wow.
And he said, and I said, all right, I'm in.
For me, I know that I occasionally forgot that these were bugs because of how deathly seriously it takes them. Phil Tippett returns to work with Verhoeven after winning an Oscar for Jurassic Park, and these guys look really sick. This is a great example of how CGI should be used. It's still real actors in real outfits in mostly real sets using real props, and the visual effects are used to create cool stuff that wouldn't be possible to pull off practically. And as inhuman as these guys look, for me, by the end, I was on their side, which is such a hard thing to pull off because they're space bugs. But as the characters join the army, slipping further and further away from humanity, their relatable desires contorted until they are literally just shells, sacks of meat, flesh, and organs ready to let themselves be maimed and brutalized, under the impression that that is where true happiness lies. The point of that infamous co-ed shower scene is to show that none of these people actually want to fight.
I'm going into politics, and you know, you gotta be a citizen for that. So here I am.
Ah, you want some responsibility?
Yeah.
Shijumi, come on, let's keep it going.
I got into Harvard, but my father says, forget it, it's gonna cost an arm and a leg, you know? So, if I serve, Federation pays my way.
I want to have babies. You know, it's a lot easier to get a license if you serve, so.
I'm going career, officers training, all the way.
Ah, future Sky Marshal.
Because if values were all that mattered, the government wouldn't have all these people to throw onto the pile. And that's literally what they are. When Doogie Himmler shows back up around the hour and 40-minute mark, he proves that that is what they are to the higher-up people making the bigger decisions.
Elegant proof of intelligence, isn't it? I thought there might be a brain bug on P.
You knew and you sent them anyway?
We couldn't afford to launch an operation if there wasn't one.
They promised to be friends to the end, but off-screen he has completely transformed into somebody willing to let them die. And the resistance that the main characters show when he does this is, of course, treated as a character flaw that they have to overcome before accepting that it's all just fine and he was doing what had to be done, and that their government is always right at all times and never makes a bad decision.
Well, too bad. We're in this for the species, boys and girls. It's simple numbers. They have more. And every day, I have to make decisions that send hundreds of people like you to their deaths.
It's kind of a running joke among even people who love this movie, admitting that it's a bit silly that they don't just use their resources to, like, nuke the bugs, but of course they don't. Of course they don't. Their superiors constantly send them to places knowing that they will die. If you weren't already convinced by everything the movie shows you that this government is fascist, the ending will absolutely do it. Because what is the final victory? It isn't ensuring the safety of the human race, It isn't peace between worlds, it isn't the conflict being over, and it isn't even the already insidious annihilation of an entire species.
The only good bug is a dead bug.
Instead, it is, of course,
It's afraid. It's afraid!
that it's scary, that the space vagina bug is imposed by them. You know what's scary? This fucking movie. It honestly terrifies me, not because of the inhumanity of the bugs, but because of the inhumanity of the humans. Yeah, it's funny that the news channel thing censors the cow being killed, but not the thousands of humans who were just slaughtered, but it's funny because it's sad, and it absolutely would happen in real life. All of this is plausible, as the years since this movie has released have shown. Starship Troopers is amazing. There is so much more that I could say about it, but I'm gonna end it here because I just don't want to think about it anymore. It's a great movie. It is a powerful movie. It's a funny movie. It's a technically impressive movie. It's an important movie. But god damn, is it a depressing one. I'm gonna say it. Fascism fucking sucks. Oof. Hollow Man isn't very good. It's a science fiction horror slasher thriller movie about Kevin Bacon as a scientist who volunteers to be the first human test subject for this experimental invisibility technology. But oh no, the de-invisibility doesn't work, and he's stuck like this, and he starts to lose his mind. Okay. This movie isn't that bad. Credit where it's due, if this is the worst film a director makes, that's a pretty good sign. The problem with it isn't that it's particularly bad, it's just kind of a normal movie. It feels like anyone could have made it. It feels, here's what I'll say, it feels like a movie made by some old white guy who got a Best Directing Oscar like 25 years ago and just fucking cashed in, Like Hollow Man 2000, directed by Arthur Hiller, or Hollow Man 2000, directed by Kenneth Branagh. This is just a really standard genre flick, and you can kind of see where it's going from the first few minutes. If you've already seen, even 3 movies within this kind of subgenre, that already places you 10 steps ahead of this movie at all times, especially as it goes along. And look, the approach and structure of this video is already gonna put a movie like this at a disadvantage. This movie isn't satirical or deep or particularly creative or subversive, but it isn't trying to be. But hey, disposable fun has its place, and if this movie was at least well crafted, then that shit wouldn't really matter, would it? But unfortunately, it kind of isn't. I'm not saying that Verhoeven couldn't direct a movie like this well, but what I am saying is that in this case, I don't think he did. It works sporadically. I mean, he obviously isn't afraid to go all the way with the things that come with the territory of his concept, but it all just falls apart so fast. The movie starts off well enough, but I liked it less and less every scene. If we're talking positives, the most obvious one would be the effects, which are really cool. I do love the story behind how they made some of this stuff.
When it all comes together with Tom performing inside the suit, the whole thing is a fully performing character.
Clear! Come on, girl, come on. Again! Clear!
Like how somewhere out there in the world right now, there is a file with a 100% anatomically correct 3D model of every layer of Kevin Bacon's body, ding dong included.
You get him out of the scene.
And so on set, you'd either see Kevin in a black bodysuit.
The score is pretty repetitive and unremarkable, but the sound design is really strong. Kevin Bacon is not bad. Within this, there are a few short glimpses of a sufficiently mean-spirited horror comedy. But Verhoeven's direction here is just underbaked and kind of self-defeating. There are so many choices that I really just do not get the thinking behind. Like this one part where this lady thinks that something really bad happened last night, but she was like, maybe it was just a dream, and everyone is like, ooh, should we trust this guy? But for some reason they decide to show us that it was real when we see him get back into bed when it first happens, while she isn't looking at the monitor. So 40 minutes into the movie, we know that he's evil, and the rest of the second act is just waiting for them to catch up to what we already know. And it's just as exciting as it sounds. The strangest directorial choice by a long shot, one that I can't even begin to defend, was to frame Kevin Bacon's invisible shenanigans from his perspective. People say this is to place us in the headspace of the Hollow Man, allowing and eventually forcing us to indulge in his childish fantasies, which it might be, but it doesn't really work. It's a Verhoeven thing, but it doesn't fit in this movie for me. To me, the compelling part of an Invisible Man story, and hear me out on this one, is that you can't fucking see him. That he could be standing right in front of you right now and you would never even know. That's interesting, that's scary. But the movie spends shockingly little time allowing you to question where he is, a strange choice given how much time is spent on other characters thinking he might be places. There are scenes that seem to think that they're jump scares, but like, no, we knew where he was. They just showed us where he was. And Verhoeven has admitted this himself, saying that this is the first movie he felt that he shouldn't have made. And that he kind of took it on to stay afloat financially, accepting more and more of the notes from the studio and trying to avoid his typical brand of sex and violence. And he said later that he just wasn't really passionate about it, and you could tell. The effects are cool, the acting is serviceable, but it's dragged down by a generic screenplay and lazy direction. We finally made it, boys. Phase 3, consisting of the final 3 features Verhoeven has made up to this point. His output has definitely slowed down these past few years, although he hasn't been completely silent between these releases. As is tradition, he always has like a million projects in development at once, and he has begun experimenting with other mediums, including writing his first book, Jesus of Nazareth, based on the Jesus film that he never got to make, along with a semi-experimental 50-minute short film called Tricked. It's a gimmick where it's like supposedly user-generated, with the story being determined by a bunch of randos, with Verhoeven stitching together the best ideas into something usable. And yeah, it's a bit disappointing that one of our greatest living directors has only produced 1 2-hour movie per decade, but the scattered release has resulted in him only releasing projects that he is passionate about and he has full control over. These films are Black Book, a World War II thriller that marked a triumphant return to the Netherlands in 2006, Elle, a controversial but critically lauded French black comedy drama released in 2016, and Benedetta, a biographical period psychodrama that was also in French and came out in 2021. In a way, these films aren't really drastic departures from what has come before, with Black Book echoing Soldier of Orange as Benedetta does to Katie Tippel. And while Elle might not have a direct parallel to one of his previous films, it's a take on a subgenre that he has never been particularly removed from. These films are also distinctly different from his previous work. More conventionally mature,
Oh, ça fait du bien.
a bit slower,
Sors ta queue. Pardon?
a bit more careful. Given that these films lean towards being pensive dramas over abrasive blockbusters, it goes without saying that this run has been both his most critically positive and commercially modest. As far as legacy goes, well, time will tell with that one. So let's see if Paul Verhoeven can keep up with the culture. Black Book can officially join the ranks of Groundhog Day and The Departed as good movies that have never had a single good official poster. Not one. Look at this. Look at this. What is that?
Why does her hair glow?
Oh my god, ew. No, stop. These keep getting worse. Stop, stop. That being said, Black Book is a slick, pulpy historical drama that is basically the perfect middle ground between the types of films he produced in the first two phases. If someone has only seen his Hollywood movies and doesn't know where to start with his non-English films, I would suggest that they watch this one first. And the same goes for someone who has only seen his films from the Dutch era, because not only will it give them a pretty good taste of both sides, it's also just one of his best movies in my opinion. It's a close call between this and Soldier of Orange. I think ultimately this one just barely manages to get the upper hand because while Soldier of Orange has the stronger moments, Black Book retains a much more consistent level of quality from beginning to end. Both films take sharp turns in their last 30 to 45 minutes, and where Soldier of Orange had me struggling to get invested, Black Book had me hooked all the way through. This isn't just his glorious return to his home country, it is also the first film since Flesh and Blood to be written by his longtime screenwriter Hayard Soteman, with a screenplay that the two had been toiling away with for about 15 years, based on an unused idea from Soldier of Orange and very loosely adapted from the real life of Esme von Ehen. And I think that this is far and away the best screenplay that Soteman wrote for a Verhoeven movie. A film with this much shit happening in it and this many things to keep track of should feel overwhelming, but it doesn't. Pace is what makes or breaks a movie like this, and all departments deserve credit for how exceptionally this movie flows. For a 2.5 hour movie, somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes just evaporated. The story is really what surprised me the most. Based on that plot description, I couldn't tell if this was going to be a sappy, morally gray melodrama like The Reader, or a tasteless work of renegade erotic filmmaking a la The Night Porter, or, you know, some non-terrible version of either of those movies. But this movie isn't even on the same wavelength as those. It doesn't fit in terms of other movies. I guess in the mid to late 2000s there was something of a Nazi renaissance in film, with directors either succeeding or miserably failing to tell new stories about World War II era shit. But even then, this movie just feels ripped out of time. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that something like this exists, especially with just how grand and risky it all is. The colors look straight out of a Technicolor movie, with the pace and excitement of a film from the 40s, with the sex of a grindhouse movie, and all the action set pieces you could want from a late 2000s war drama. Black Book is one of the best marriages of Verhoeven's desire for entertainment and his more artistic sensibilities. An outrageously, shamelessly fun experience that isn't afraid to stay sober and remind you that it isn't all a game. It's dark, original, creative, engaging, edgy, sly, tense, funny. It's everything you could want from a Verhoeven movie.
Deep in, out, Kees. Diep inademen. Oké. Goed zo. Yep.
This movie's biggest dark horse is Carice Van Houten's scene-stealing, hell, movie-stealing performance as Rachel Stein, one of Verhoeven's strongest heroines. The lone survivor of a ship full of Jewish families gunned down by greedy, ruthless Nazis, she joins the Dutch resistance, and when a high-ranking Nazi official seems to fall for her, she finds herself at the center of a high-stakes plot of insurrection and seduction. She's resourceful, talented, clever, and courageous even in the face of death. She can be stubborn and overly trusting, but these flaws never let her sink. All of these multifaceted emotions and experiences her character goes through are there even in her most subtle of mannerisms. At her most confident, you don't forget how scared she is. And at her most vulnerable, you never forget how resilient she is. And that's not even getting into the language barrier, with her seamlessly transitioning between Dutch, Hebrew, German, and English, and she did all of her own singing, and she's fucking great at it.
bin die fesche Lola.
Der Liebling der Saison. Ich habe ein Pianola zu Hause in meinem Salon. Ich bin die fesche Lola, mich liebt ein jedermann. Doch an mein Pianola, da lass ich keinen ran. Lola!
If Elle was able to score a Best Actress nomination, I think this one definitely deserves it too. But I kinda get why she didn't get one, because they had to make room for the newcomers who hadn't had their chance in the spotlight yet, like... Well, it's still a great performance. What shocked me the most about this movie was its moral complexity. Like, it's set during World War II, so there's a pretty easy good and bad side. Like, there's no gray area between which is the correct side of the conflict, but within those lines, they create very complex characters. Nazis who are quietly tolerant and resistance fighters who still don't trust Jews.
Rotteef heeft de zaak verraden. Voor Poen ook nog, wat een smerige jodenstreek.
Zie je nou wel dat je ze nooit kan vertrouwen. Nooit. Geen...
And once the war is over, this dichotomy is brought to the center. And this is part of why I think Black Book succeeds where Soldier of Orange fails, because it doesn't introduce something new in the back half of the film, but brings something that was already there to the surface. Around the hour and 40-minute mark, the war ends. The Nazis have been defeated and all is right in the world. Except not really. For our characters, the worst is kind of yet to come. The final hour of the film deals with the fallout from a sinister misunderstanding hatched by the main villain of the film that leads the members of the resistance to believe that she was the one betraying them the whole time and was working for the Nazis all along.
Een verklaring is geen excuus. Die meid die maken we af. Hoe dan ook. Waar dan ook. Wanneer dan ook.
So the perspective has shifted, and now we're watching a Jewish woman who needs to prove her innocence while being subjected to all of the inhumanities faced by the former Nazis in the name of justice. This shift, if handled poorly, could have been in poor taste. Like, the Nazis systematically murdered millions of innocent men, women, and children, but after the war, people bullied them. But because the first half of the film is so personal and isn't attempting to be about the Nazi ideology, I think it completely earns its final reels. This film isn't an ideological appeal, but a humanistic one. The world is a lot better without the Third Reich. Better is better, but better doesn't mean perfect. And the extrajudicial justice that the locals exacted on the collaborators, even without sufficient evidence, was pretty messed up, and people don't talk about that. Even rarer, this is a story that shows how anti-Semitism can exist on the left as well as the right, and it absolutely does. While it is nowhere near as fun as the first 90 minutes of the film, this last hour is honestly just as engaging and even more unpredictable. I really had no idea what was gonna happen. I found some of the resolutions to be a little too neat, and some characters are less important than they maybe should be, but for the stuff that really matters, this movie nails. Here's how I'll say it, this feels like the kind of movie that I'll return to every couple years and be like, wait, was that movie actually mid? Was I just overhyping it in my review? I mean, look at that poster. It couldn't have been that good, right? And I hope that when that happens, I am inspired to rewatch the movie and be blown away by it again. This movie fucking took my breath away. It's so good. Unfortunately, this movie is another example of a film seeming eerily relevant to current events, especially the ending, which flashes forward to 1956 in Israel, bringing back the frame story that also opened the film. Rachel is reflecting on her past, and then her family comes to join her, revealing that she is now living in a kibbutz funded by the money stolen from her family and other Jewish victims of the war. It's a brief moment that lulls you into a false sense of tranquility before reality comes in. Sirens and explosions are heard in the distance, cars drive in, it's an air raid, and the film unceremoniously fades to black as armed Israeli soldiers get into position for conflict, war. Given the time period, it's obvious that this is the beginning of the Suez Crisis, a short but very complex time for all countries involved. But none of those complexities are shown on screen. When I first saw it, I had no idea what was going on. It intentionally deliberately devalues them, distilling war into its blunt, stupid essence. A bunch of guys with guns versus other guys with guns, and everyone gets caught in the crossfire. It might look different, but is it really? I don't know. I think that it just proves this message that history repeats itself. I don't have a joke to end this segment on. Just wow. What an amazing film. Elle is the name of Paul Verhoeven's first movie in French. Oh no, Paul, not you too. I guess the woke mob has expanded so far that now even the titles of movies have pronouns. Did you get that one? That was a good one. Me being hilarious aside, I think that Elle is a very fitting name for this movie. In this Golden Globe winning, Oscar-nominated film, a woman deals with the fallout from a violent rape by a masked man, and she tries to find his identity, but it sticks to the conventions of a rape revenge narrative about as much as Turkish Delight does romance. It's like the title is telling you, this is a movie about her. Because female-led movies are rarely commercially successful, when one does come out and it does do well, people like to say shit like,
Barbie is this generation's feminist movie. Why Mad Max, Fury Road is the feminist picture of the year. Ghostbusters was the feminist win we've all been waiting for. Wonder Woman is the feminist hero we've been waiting for.
A burden which no movie should have to carry on its own, and especially not this one. I know a lot of rape survivors and women say that this is a very liberating film for them, and that's fucking awesome. I'm so happy that they can see themselves in the story in a positive way. And that's even more impressive because the movie doesn't even feel like it's trying to do that. In fact, out of every Verhoeven film, this one actually feels the least concerned with the people watching it. Because for once, this movie isn't about them. It's about the title. It's about her. Elle is Paul Verhoeven's only character study, and I'm happy he took this risk for the movie because that's like the only way to do justice to this character. Michelle LeBlanc is the most complex character to ever find themselves within Verhoeven's canvas. She doesn't just break the conventions of women in society, she actively resents them. Most people focus on the fact that she goes out of her way to prove that she isn't a victim, but her character is so much more than that. She speaks her mind directly, unafraid to be perceived as crude. She wants people to think that she is this confidently detached, intelligent, immovable force, when in actuality she's deeply concerned with how others perceive her. She's icy, but definitely not humorless. She's even a bit of a romantic. She's at her most controlled while being at her most impulsive.
Oui, mais un écrivain fauché.
Tiens, quelqu'un t'a cabossé ton pare-choc.
Quelqu'un.
Salut.
She doesn't act normal a lot of the time, but she still values formality. She says please, thank you, sorry constantly. Offended by poor manners, yet just as often impolite to the people who care for her the most.
Ralph et moi, nous sommes fiancés et nous allons nous marier.
Excuse-moi.
This contradiction is best seen in the opening of the film, which sees the character dealing with the off-screen attack. Sheila O'Malley put this very well in the opening line of her 4 out of 4 star review for RogerEbert.com, so I'm gonna read a quote from that right now. She said that perhaps only Paul Verhoeven would open a film mid-rape, the violent attack observed by an unimpressed green-eyed cat, and then follow up with the scene where Michelle, the rape victim, face puffy from the beating, picks up a phone and orders takeout, asking questions about the holiday roll. This is such a brave film, not just because it deals with subjects that no other team would touch with a 10-foot pole, but because it only does those for the sake of the character. If this movie really wanted to be as shocking as possible, it wouldn't look anything like this. This film isn't exploitative, it is frank, often uncomfortably so. Like that review alludes to, and probably the most talked about element of the film comes in the opening few minutes. We don't see the rape happen, we just hear the end of it over a black screen, and then we see the eyes of her cat watching this happen, emotionless, a reflection of her own detachment. And you aren't sure what she is going to do. I mean, what can you do? She sweeps up the glass, she throws away her clothes, she takes a bath and tries to hide the visible vaginal blood staining the bubbles, not because it helps her forget what happened, but just so she doesn't have to look at it. And then, she orders takeout. She takes actions that most people wouldn't take themselves, going back and forth between stuff that compartmentalizes what happens and brings it to the forefront. She doesn't call the police, but she sleeps with a hammer. She doesn't cancel her plans with her son later, but she brushes away the question of how she got the black eye. She does go to work the next day, avoiding telling anyone about it, but when reviewing a cutscene for her hyper-violent and over-sexed fantasy video game, where this weird orc thing attacks this lady and penetrates her skull with symbolic phallic tendrils, she insists that...
Non mais, quoi, on en avait déjà parlé, les convulsions orgasmiques sont beaucoup trop timides.
C'est à croire qu'ils ont peur du sexe.
C'est déjà multiplié par 5.
Ça se voit pas, faut y aller beaucoup plus franche.
As I am talking about the main character, we, of course, we get to talk about the performance. I'm gonna be real with y'all. This is as much Isabella Huppert's movie as it is Paul Verhoeven's movie, and potentially even more so hers. She read the book it's based on, and when talks of an adaptation started, she immediately tried to get in there, and while there was a short period of time where Verhoeven was going to make the movie in English, Huppert was eyeing this story years before Verhoeven was. And Verhoeven will be the first person to tell you this.
And in the center of it all, Isabelle Huppert. It has been a wonderful experience to work with Isabelle. She is so talented. I thank you, Isabelle, for everything you have given to this movie, for your talent, for your audacity, for your authenticity of performance. I think it was wonderful to work with you. You are wonderful, and I love you. And I love you, I love you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
It is not a controversial statement to say that she is one of our greatest living actors, and you could definitely make the case that this is her single best performance. I personally find articulating what makes a performance good or bad to be one of the most difficult aspects of film for me to write about, especially when we get to super extreme sides of the spectrum, either really great or really bad. I just don't feel like I have as much of a grasp on the science of acting like I do other aspects of filmmaking, but what I can do is say whether or not I feel it, and in this case, I absolutely do. The way she uses her eyes will always stand out to me. How her gaze will carefully drift in and out is always perfectly timed to what the character is saying or thinking. I mean, come on. It's just... Dude, she's incredible. I love you, Sharon Stone, but wow, it isn't even close. This is easily the best performance in a Paul Verhoeven movie, and by a fucking landslide. I mean, I could say I was blown away, but at this point it's hard to be surprised that she delivered a great performance. Now, in the beginning of this movie, it definitely seems like it is going in the direction of a typical rape revenge film, where the whodunit aspects are really highlighted. Elle is one of few films within this subgenre that doesn't neglect the fact that most rapes are done by people that the victim already knows, with every man in the movie having reasons why they may or may not be the attacker in question. At first, it doesn't look like the most original plot, but this character is what really keeps the story moving along with its direction and writing. This is one of Verhoeven's best directed films, and it's in a way that took me a bit to fully grasp. Maybe it's just because so many of his films do exist one layer off of reality in contrast to this one, which is very contemporary and grounded. You know, with this film, it might seem like it's a bit more generic. There's a lot of shot reverse shot, a lot of over-the-shoulder cameras, the lighting doesn't stand out, but it's so intentional. It's curt and tactful, never drawing attention to itself, but disquieting and occasionally dreamlike. The black colors in this movie are so dark that they almost resemble like a key black, a particularly stark choice, especially in the scenes with the masked assailant. Muted, yes. Bland, hell no. Part of what makes me say that this is the Verhoeven film that is the least interested in its audience is because when, of course, the movie takes directions drastically different from anything you would expect, it isn't an exact moment you can pinpoint like the motorcycle crash in Spetters or the end of the war in Black Book. Instead, the movie is on a set path from the beginning, and while that path will resemble something like a rape revenge film when it starts, each viewer will realize that it's going in a different direction at their own specific time. For some, it will be Michelle's fantasy sequence where she imagines bashing in the face of her rapist with this sort of devilish smile. For others, it will be the shocking moment where the attacker returns around an hour and 20 minutes into the movie and the subsequent reveal. For myself, it wasn't that scene so much as it was the actions that she took in response. For some, it might not even hit them until the film's disquieting final shot, which actually made me gasp when I first saw it. Not because there's like a twist in it like Basic Instinct, but because when the directed by credit showed up, I was like, oh my god, wait, that's the ending? But all of it is so wholly true to the character. But let's talk about that scene where the attacker returns, because it's really when the film begins to show its true colors. Before that, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's kind of all over the place, and I was wondering if they were gonna tie together. The video at her work, the story of the victim within the video game, the stuff about her dad, the death of her mother, her son's annoying boyfriend, the affairs. These elements don't coalesce into a tidy, simple story, but their purposes are revealed in the film's final 50 minutes, which I will talk about now. So the controversy around this film mainly comes down to the difficulty of its main topic, a topic which to many is just too out there, too sensitive, one which the process of even naming requires such a level of lawlessness that it's impossible to be done tastefully. Elle is the story of a rape survivor who finds herself aroused by sexual violence and is unafraid to allow it to happen again for the purposes of sexual pleasure. And don't think that allow it to happen again means, you know, role-playing it with a consensual partner in safe and controlled environments that are mutually agreed upon, you know, anything resembling a healthy BDSM relationship, because that's absolutely not what this is. When Michelle is attacked again, which leads to my only, like, artistic criticism of the movie, that they play the sound effect every time he shows up, and it's really distracting. She stabs him through the hand with a pair of scissors and takes off his mask, revealing that he is Patrick, her neighbor with a devout Catholic wife. And this is why this is the scene where a lot of people catch on to the fact that this isn't a typical rape revenge film, because when given the opportunity to revenge the hell out of him, she tells him to get the fuck out. I wasn't fully convinced at that point that it wasn't still working its way up to her killing him, but I did think it was strange that she didn't. For me, it was the moment where after getting into a car crash, she calls people for help who don't respond, and then she calls Patrick. And when I saw this, I was like, girl, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, he's strong, and I get why she doesn't want to call the police, but is your rapist really the only... Oh. Now, without the mask on, up to this point, Patrick is a completely different person, like the most generic, boring, handsome white man to ever live, and he helps her out of the car crash like he's just her neighbor. Like he doesn't know that she knows that he's the one who raped her, even though he did, and she knows and he knows. And then she keeps arranging meetings with Patrick because she likes it, or, well, she likes not liking it. Is the way she goes about this healthy in the snow. But this movie isn't called Healthy Kinky Couple, it's called Elle, and we should expect it to be about that, about her, and this is what she would do, and as we come to realize, has done in the past. Michelle's father went on a killing spree when she was about 10, murdering about 20 odd people and some animals, and then came home and told her that they were going to burn all their stuff, and she did it because he was her father and thus had a lot of power over her. But the cops came and took pictures, and now she can never live that image down.
Et juste quand on allait mettre les vêtements dans le feu, la police est arrivée. Quelqu'un m'a pris en photo. Et bizarrement, c'est cette photo-là qui est restée gravée dans la mémoire des gens. De moi, à moitié nue, couverte de cendres. La photo de la petite fille psychopathe. À côté de son père. Psychopathe. J'ai un regard vide sur la photo qui est terrifiant.
Her relationship with Patrick is deeply connected to the one she had with her father. Of course it is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as focused on, but even ignoring that, they parallel each other a lot. We even see a picture of what her father looked like before the incident, and he looks a lot like Patrick. After seeing this on the news, she is inspired to go visit him and spit in his face and say, "Fuck you," thus winning that relationship, nebulous as the idea of winning a relationship sounds. Sure, it was awful what happened to her, but by doing that, she can prove her victory over that traumatic experience. But then, he one-ups her, hanging himself in prison the night before and thus denying her that small win. If anyone won that relationship, it was him. And once that game ends, she starts a new one that she can't lose. The drive away from the prison her dad lived at, where she ended that game, is what caused the car crash, and in response, when she has no one to turn to, she starts a new one by calling Patrick. She knows that anything Patrick does will be a victory for her. She isn't stupid, she knows how dangerous being around him is. Do your worst, she wants it. The part when he drives her home and says, "You're a rapist, what we're doing here is awful, I'm gonna go to the cops," isn't an actual revelation. Nothing prompts it, and she doesn't seem to change at all. It's part of it. She knows what he is going to do when he hears this, and exactly how he is going to try to stop her, and if he ends up hurting her, or maybe even killing her, that plays into her erotic fantasy. If he kills himself like her father, then she gets victory over her rapist. This back and forth is exemplified best by the scene where she willingly walks downstairs while her son is passed out on the ground floor, where all sound is muffled, and she still screams when he starts hurting and having sex with her, role-playing the surprise of the other attacks, even though obviously she's not surprised. As he's about to hit her, she says this. And then he stops and is taken aback because...
Ça peut pas marcher comme ça. Pas pour moi. Il faut que ce soit comme avant.
And then what does she do when he starts to get up to make him stop getting up? She pulls him back in and hits him, and so it continues. And people will see this and be like, why is she doing this? It's stupid, it's amoral, it's unhealthy, it's dangerous. And yeah, of course it is. It's shameful, but as she says in the movie...
Tu sais, la honte, c'est pas un sentiment assez fort pour nous empêcher de commettre quoi que ce soit. Crois-moi.
It's a very difficult movie to watch, of course it is. But it's a real story. While not every single plot thread wraps up neatly, the ending of this movie addresses that, and that was never its goal. If it ended on a very decisive note, either in a positive or negative direction, then it wouldn't really be super satisfying. Because this is a movie about the messiness of dealing with trauma, which is something that will never fully end. And that is what is universal about this movie. This isn't the story about how women or people deal with trauma or anything like that. It is a very specific story about this very specific woman and how she deals with her very specific trauma. Nobody is going to do exactly what Michelle does in this movie, but it shows that dealing with trauma is a messy process. But it's an important one, and one that we have to take. And while this movie's reception has mostly been quite positive, the way its detractors speak in their reviews kind of shows why the film needed to be made. Not that everyone who dislikes the film thinks this way. The negative reviews written by independent sources tend to be more substantive, but almost all of the film critics in actual publications seem to revel in how toxic the relationship between these two fictional characters is. You're not supposed to see what Michelle does in this movie and be like, oh, yeah, I should do that. What is inspiring about this movie is that it doesn't vilify her for doing the wrong thing, that it shows how in the moment the wrong thing can be enticing. It shows that it's okay to make mistakes along the path to healing, that mistakes are natural, and if you use those mistakes to learn and grow, that is when you will always win. People often do irrational things when faced with terrible events, and that's fine, that's normal. It's a process. The film ends with a scene at the graveyard of Michelle's father, and her friend, whose marriages she ended up breaking, stands next to her. They have a nice conversation that shows that Michelle understands how shitty what she did was, but her friend doesn't hold a grudge against her for it. The final shot is of them walking away from her father's grave together. We don't see them exit the graveyard, but we do see them proudly walking away from it. Not in denial of the terrible things that happened, but ready to grow from them. They happened, and those scars may never fully heal, but it doesn't stop them from continuing on fulfilling happy lives. I was surprised by so much of this movie, but nothing is more shocking to me than the fact that despite all of its bleakness, Elle somehow manages to completely earn an honest-to-God, unsanitized yet truthful, unabashed, non-melodramatic, genuine, happy ending. Hell yeah. The last 3 movies he has made, people went in with clenched asses, ready to say it's a disappointment or he's lost his edge, but
this motherfucker don't miss.
Fun fact, I watched the beginning of this movie the year it was released while in PE class. I asked my teacher if I could listen to something with my headphones on during the run, and he said, yeah, sure. And I did listen to something while running. It was this movie, and I was also watching it. It actually took me until the scene where she takes off Jesus's undies and he has a fucking vagina to realize that maybe that wasn't the best idea. I don't know, I feel like I had to say that. Anyway, Jesus Christ, poop, nuns, lesbian sex, and suicide. What more could you want? Now, y'all know I love the guys at Red Letter Media, and I owe so much more to them than I can begin to express right now, not just in terms of this channel, but in terms of me as the person that I am today. I already played that clip from their Total Recall review that I agreed with, but at the end of that video, they said one thing that really stood out to me when I first watched that review.
I wish he made more science fiction movies.
Yeah. He just released a movie about lesbian nuns.
Yeah, because he's an art guy. I think at heart. I think when he made his RoboCop, Total Recall, Starship Troopers trilogy, I think in his head he was doing that ironically. This is garbage, and I'm gonna satirize it. And he accidentally made awesome popcorn science fiction films.
And yeah, I kind of get what they're saying, and I do agree that there is absolutely a sense of irony in those pictures, and they clearly hadn't seen the movie at that point. But on the other hand, no. And I say this lovingly, but no.
Yeah, because he's an art guy.
The first scene starts out looking like it's gonna be all dark and serious, and then a bird shits in this guy's eyeball, and this guy farts fire. Paul Verhoeven's blockbusters are the work of someone who is way better than most people in his field, but he doesn't think of himself that way. Paul Verhoeven seems to like getting praised for his hard work, obviously, we all do. And it might be a little disappointing for him when people get angry about his films, but what he won't stand for is if you're not entertained.
Votre Excellence, je meurs. Ne me laissez pas mourir comme ça.
Allez trouver le prêtre de votre paroisse. Demandez-lui l'absolution.
C'est moi le prêtre de la paroisse.
So despite what the French, the biographical nature, and the period setting might make you think, that is just as present in the lesbian nun movie. Luckily, Paul Verhoeven is showing as much signs of slowing down as he ever has, but I think if Benedetta were his final film, knock on wood, it would be a dang poetic ending. I absolutely want him to keep making movies. I think he's one of the greatest artists of our time, and the thought of him making a female-led English-language erotic thriller with Ed Neumeyer gets me so excited. But this film honestly feels like an amalgamation of all of his favorite ideas into one fascinating, if not overstuffed package. All of our favorites are here: religious imagery, misogyny, systems of oppression, class, the power of sex. But make no mistake, this is no old man going through the motions movie. This isn't a greatest hits album, but a wholly distinct experience created out of new takes on familiar elements. The story of this movie is honestly kind of perfect. It's a story that seems like it was made to be a Verhoeven movie, and for that, we all have to thank the Catholic Church. Good job, you guys. Woo! Sorry. It's based on the non-fiction book Immodest Acts, The Life of a Lesbian Nun in Renaissance Italy by Judith C. Brown, and tells the story of Benedetta Cardellini, a lesbian nun in Renaissance Italy. It's a fascinating true story. Paul Verhoeven said that Katie Tippel is the only movie he would consider remaking, but honestly, I think this film works pretty well as an unofficial remake of that movie. It taps into all of the same themes, but with better characters, tighter pacing, stronger performances, and a lot more emotional impact. And with this film, he seems to be fully in control of the production and where the money goes, creating a film that is able to properly deliver on its lofty ambitions. This is yet another Paul Verhoeven movie about a blonde who may or may not be lying about everything, but with a thoroughly unique take on it. For starters, the scale is upped considerably, literally being of cosmic proportions. Benedetta keeps having these strange visions of this skinny Jew named Jesus, who was apparently, important to these people for some reason, and he got, crucified. But then, when signs of his wounds begin to appear on her, she sends the convent into a frenzy. Do they have a woman chosen by God, or a heretic? Now, I am going to try to avoid spoiling too much about this one, because, one, because I don't really have to in order to talk about why it's good, but also because it's relatively recent, even though statistically, if you've seen any of his non-English films, it would probably be this one, but whatever. Like in The Fourth Man, Paul Verhoeven goes out of his way to present equally likely secular and spiritual possibilities, never going too far in either direction, and crafting enjoyable and creative set pieces that will push each viewer closer to their own decision on if she's crazy or not. She does show the signs, but it only happens when nobody is looking. That voice does sound pretty real, but there's broken glass in the scene. All this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Not only does this make literally every scene dynamic and important, along with being ridiculously fun, but it also makes the movie's story constantly engaging and surprising. I honestly had no idea where the story was headed, and since the scenes are so well done, I found myself appreciating them just as much on my second watch when I knew where the story was going as I did on my first, and it helps when you're not running while watching it. This film is less interested in the mystery of its heroine's intent than Basic Instinct or even The Fourth Man. He never confirms or denies if Benedetta is a poser or a martyr, if the wounds were self-inflicted or acts of fate, because nobody knows the truth in real life. It's hard to pick a favorite aspect of this movie because it's all so good. If I had to, it would probably be the weird dream vision fantasy nightmare sequences. It's like some of the most gonzo filmmaking in his entire career condensed into a minute each. I'm not even exactly sure what the meaning behind these parts are, but they're a lot of fun. Good job. The design of this movie is so richly detailed and strikes that perfect balance between cleanliness and dirtiness. This movie looks great, it sounds great, some of those visual effects, not so great. The acting is great. I really didn't think much of Virginia Efira in Elle. She isn't bad, but she's like the 12th most important character in that movie. But I'm so happy that Paul Verhoeven did, because she is absolutely fearless in this. Every movie in Phase 3 so far have been perfect vehicles for their leading ladies, and this one is no exception. This movie is just so unapologetic in every aspect, and that's why I think people liked it as much as they did. I like that almost everyone seems to enjoy it at least a little bit, even if they have their own problems with it. Like, if you're part of the art house crowd, you might groan a bit at the scatological humor, but you're gonna be super immersed in the style and pace of this movie. If you want just a straight costume drama or an adaptation of a true story, the goofy demon voice and the fantasy comment might take you out of it, but you'll definitely be able to enjoy the production value and its use of historical accuracy, gleefully twisting the real events for the purposes of truthful exaggeration. And if you want a sexy, forbidden lesbian romance movie, you might start to check out a bit in the last 45 minutes where it takes a back seat, but you'll fully be on board for this movie's sensual, slow first hour and a half with its playful anticipation and release of tension. This creates a movie that I think is harder for people to enjoy all the way through, but is almost impossible to not get something out of. Unless you're Catholic. Actually, I don't want to strawman anyone here, because according to some sources, about a third of the audience in New York was actually Catholic. But outside, there was this pathetic posse of protesters, people who hadn't even seen the movie. Look, Verhoeven made a film that's edgy, controversial, gorgeous, subversive, literate, and lyrical, so you might think it's a little ridiculous, but you haven't heard their persuasive, soft, and angelic music. Thousands of people were trying to get it banned in the States, which obviously didn't work, but the film actually was banned in Singapore and Russia. Paul Verhoeven has been doing this for so long. He is so old, and he still gets people whining like tiny little babies.
If someone were to punch your mother, would you just stand there and watch? No, you have to respond. Just finished a campaign in front of the Lincoln Center here in Manhattan, and it was against a blasphemous movie called Benedetta that attacks the church and specifically the vocation of being a nut.
This film is little more than a soft porn fictional account that gratuitously offends the Christian faith in what is a cheap act of religious hatred.
The producer, the Dutch producer, Paul Verhoeven.
It's extremely offensive, and they're calling it entertainment, just like in the Roman times, they killed Christians and called that entertainment.
Reparation! 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 Shame! Shame! Reparation! Reparation!
Maybe if you really love people, you wouldn't be screaming.
If this was a film attacking the holiness of Islam, it'd never be shown.
They wouldn't make a movie about something like this, about the Muslim faith.
Imagine if they made something like that about the Quran or about what Muhammad did. No, it wouldn't fly.
But what's wrong with being a lesbian?
Again.
Oh, because you're the holier than thou. Have you ever seen
intellectual argument.
You've ever
Now she's just straight up lying.
Have you seen the movie?
You don't have to.
No,
I don't have to go into a sewer to know it stinks, okay?
Brilliant idea with the bagpipes, too.
I love him so much. He's made so many classic films that people will still be talking about long after everyone watching this video is dead. In the process, pissing off conservatives, liberals, feminists, politicians, Hollywood, Nazis, gay people, straight people, the censor boards, his own screenwriters, men and women, and at the age of 80, he decided, you know what, it's about time I make a movie about the Vatican. This might not be his most substantive satire, but it is one of his most clever and fun. This film is very focused on its main theme, that society views the female body as something inherently sinful.
Encore quelques semaines et il sera là. J'ai déjà du lait. Nous n'avons pas le droit d'être nus devant les autres. Vraiment?
La luxure d'une femme envers une autre,
Benedetta's lover, Bartolomea, stands out among the other members of the convent because she's new, she's a peasant, and thus doesn't have the same standards of purity as the church, presented as being a more natural, earthly character. I have honestly never seen a shit joke more integral to a film's themes. Yeah, it's pretty crass, but that attitude is what Benedetta finds so attractive about Bartolomea, and is what causes her to stop repressing the desire she feels for her. This film goes out of its way to make the lesbian urges look like the most natural, pure thing in this house of God, with every other character fully drenched in some level of hypocritical sludge shown by Verhoeven with gleeful transgression. It's part of why Benedetta is pushed so far as a Christ figure, but the hypocrisy of everyone around her is shown in some smaller ways, of which I'll share some of my favorites now. When Benedetta's indiscretions are reported to the nuncio, the representative of the Pope, his cronies say that they've searched everywhere in Benedetta's room for a particular piece of evidence, and he tells them, well, look again. And then they do, and they still don't find it. It is only after torturing the location out of Bartolomea that they are able to access it. Where is it hiding? What's the one place that the Catholic Church would never think to look for answers in? It's in the Bible. They hid it in a Bible. How is their relationship even discovered? Well, we see early on in the film that the former abbess has installed a peephole in the wall of the room, itself a mortal sin.
Et ça n'est pas un péché mortel? Espionner sa mère supérieure?
Le témoignage de Sœur Félicita n'est qu'un début, pas une fin.
Well, he says that, but it isn't. Nothing comes out of that investigation because the nuncio has his own agenda. Everyone who tries to bring down Benedetta does so out of their own spite or vices, countering the notion that every person who believes in God is a raging homophobe, but still painting a very critical light on the backbone of organized religion, while never attempting to insult everyone who has ever been a part of the church, even if it might do so in the process. There's honestly so much to love about Benedetta, and I wish it got more attention. I mean, yeah, it premiered in competition for the Palme d'Or, but like, that basically means you're one of the 50 best movies in the festival that year. Like, Nicholas Winding Refn has been nominated for that 3 separate times. Not like he's a terrible director, but like, it's been 3 times. It's not that high of a bar. But I really think that if the people who were turned off by the premise and stills of this movie thinking that it was just this pretentious art house film actually watched it, they would realize how wrong they are. Not because this is a perfect movie, and not even because it's one of his best. It isn't. I think that the resolutions to some of the plot lines feels a little unceremonious, and while no single subplot stands out as being worse than the others, I think you could probably find a way to cut maybe one of them to make the narrative a little cleaner. But perfection has never been this guy's goal, even if many people like myself believe he actually did reach it with RoboCop. Paul Verhoeven in his golden years hasn't sat up on his high horse making personal films that people will pretend to like. He hasn't retired, even though he's absolutely earned it if he wanted to. He isn't withering away repeating a successful formula or indulging in routine. Like, he made his least Verhoeven film and followed it up with his most Verhoeven film, and if Young Sinner turned out to be a fucking direct-to-Crunchyroll anime series, that would only be like slightly out of left field. If he is a character in this movie, it isn't the nuncio. He is the entertainer in the prologue. The one who might be really old, but is covering his face enough to trick you and himself into thinking that he's just getting started, and farting fire into the faces of skeletons like his only purpose in life is to make people entertained. This is Benedetta. That is this movie. He got a Golden Globe, but I think he wanted that like the farting guy did. This movie is an entertaining, on-the-nose, flashy dance with explosive farts, and it just so happens to be one of the smartest, sexiest, most committed motion pictures of the decade that I've seen. Keep cinema weird, keep cinema smart, keep cinema horny, and keep cinema fun. Amen. I mean, honestly, those words that I just said to end that segment kind of summarize everything I could have said with a conclusion. This video took forever. As I've been editing this review, which for the record did take over 6 months to do, and as I've been re-recording and, you know, rewriting and working on other shit. I keep getting in my head that Paul Verhoeven is gonna get fucking Me Too'd like the day before I post the video. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. All I have to say is to those few freaks who somehow, for some reason, watched all 3.5 hours of this video or whatever, is thank you? I hope that was entertaining. I don't know if it was, but thank you for supporting me. I'm never going to make a video like this ever again. Ever. But hey, at least I can say it's finally over. And with that, I'll see you next year in 2024. Bye-bye.